Good evening. This is Tim Johnson, and the Brattleboro Selectboard is up next here on BCTV. A fairly light agenda, but some weighty matters tonight. Firstly, the monthly finance report from Town Finance Director John O'Connor. Further discussion of a public meeting schedule on the proposed police fire facilities project. Potential select board vote for engineering service contracts for brownfield grant work, and the first of two public hearings on the proposed zoning code and land use regulations. A second will be held on November 10th. Stay with us. The Brattleboro Select Board is next here on BCTV.
Good evening. It's October 27th, and we're here for our last October meeting for 2015, our meeting of the Brattleboro Select Board. I want to welcome everybody who's watching on BCTV. I want to welcome everybody who's in attendance. I want to welcome members of the press, BCTV technicians, and our ASL interpreters. We already called the meeting to order at 5:15 and went into executive session to discuss real estate options, labor relations matters, contracts, and a number of other matters where premature general knowledge would have created a disadvantage for the town and the board and people involved. We know that the meeting's been officially warned, so the first matter on the agenda tonight is to approve the minutes from September 29 and October 6, 2015. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes, please? We have motion to approve the minutes from September 9 and October 6, 2015. Is there any discussion, any comments or edits from anybody on the board? Anybody who's in attendance have anything to say about those minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. The next matter on tonight's agenda is chair's remarks. The only comments that I'll make tonight have to do with the sidewalk project. Looks to me like we have successfully weathered the sidewalk reconstruction project. I spoke with Mr. Zaluzny mid-afternoon today, and it looks to me like virtually all of the work on the sidewalks is completed. The poly sand has been finished up around the bricks. Some damage to some of the pieces of sidewalk that had happened during reconstruction has been repaired, and there may just be a couple of tiny punch list items. We want to thank everybody for their patience and for weathering the disruption that went on while the sidewalks were being rebuilt. But we think that it's a real improvement, and it sets us up really with sidewalk that will now last 100 years into the future. So we're glad to see that that project is completed. It involved many, many moving parts, and we want to thank Zaluzny for their work. We also want to thank especially the Department of Public Works for all of their effort in coordinating that project and interacting with merchants, making sure that everybody's needs were met through that project, and for coordinating that project along with all the other summer work that the Department of Public Works had to take care of. They also have just finished up all of the paving work, the summer paving work, and some drainage work associated with that as well. It was a very busy summer for the Department of Public Works, and we want to thank all of those employees for their effort this summer. That's all of my remarks. Next is town manager's comments.
I have none this evening off the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. The next matter on the agenda is select board comments and committee reports. Anybody on the select board have any comments or committee reports to make?
Would you like me to read a proclamation?
Yes, please. We recognize Kate O'Connor with a proclamation.
This will be exciting, everybody. This is about Small Business Saturday, so I'm going to read the proclamation. read, I have to take my glasses off. Whereas the government of Brattleboro, Vermont celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community, according to the United States Small Business Administration, there are currently 27.9 million small businesses in the United States. They represent 99.7% of American employer firms, create more than 2/3 of the net new jobs, and generate 46% of private gross domestic product, as well as 57% of all U.S. sales. 54% of all U.S. sales. And whereas small businesses employ over 55% of the working population in the United States, and whereas 89% of consumers in the United States agree that small businesses contribute positively to the local economy by supplying jobs and generating tax revenue, and whereas 87% of consumers in the United States agree that small businesses are critical to the overall economic health of the United States, and whereas 93% of consumers in the United States agree that it is important for people to support the small businesses that they value in their community, and whereas Brattleboro, Vermont supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our neighborhoods. And whereas Brattleboro, Vermont has 870 small businesses that employ over 2,000 people, and whereas in Brattleboro, Vermont, small businesses make up 88.3% of Brattleboro's total businesses, and whereas advocacy groups as well as private and public organizations across the country have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday, now therefore be it resolved that Brattleboro, Vermont does hereby proclaim November 28th, 2015 as Small Business Saturday. And we urge the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year.
Wonderful job.
Thank you, Kate. I don't think there's a need for a vote, but by acclamation, I think we will sign that proclamation. Thanks, Kate, for reading that and presenting that to the board. Anybody else on the board have any reports, committee reports, or select board comments?
2 waste management district meetings this week, but nothing concrete yet to report.
Anything else? All right, the next matter on tonight's agenda is public participation. This is an opportunity for anybody who's in attendance who'd like to speak to any matter that's not on tonight's agenda to do so. Is there anybody who wants to speak to something that's not on tonight's select board agenda? The next matter on the agenda is under new business, the financial report. Mr. O'Connor.
Great. Thank you, David. So in the packet is the financial report for the month of September, and we are 25% of the way through the fiscal year. And the general fund, after making the adjustments for the semi-annual and annual payments that are included, we have, in prorating those expenses, the budget stands at 21.8%. So we're doing well compared to where we would forecast ourselves to be. Utilities fund was at 23.8%. Parking was at 19.4% of their budgets as of the end of September. And included in the utilities was an encumbrance of $95,000 for sludge removal, which is the purchase order for the entire year. And if we adjust that and prorate that, our utilities fund would be at 22.6% of its annual budget. So again, all 3 funds are doing very well. The solid waste disposal fund revenues were at 24.3%, and expenditures were at 21.3%. And as I explained last month, the solid waste fund revenues and expenditures, at least a good part of those revenues and expenditures, are really only reflecting 2 months worth of revenues and expenditures. And we will get the invoices for the collection, tipping costs in November, and those will be booked in November. Or in this case, in October.
We're going to have a better idea about all that
in about 6 months, right?
We should have a pretty good feel for
where
how
things
it's
are going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whoever's got that telephone, if we could turn that off, that would be nice. Thank you.
The loan report shows we have $3,998,411 in outstanding loans. 3 of the loans had payments that were overdue. 2 of the loans were in default and fully reserved, so really no change from the last few months. The program income report indicates that we had $292,278 in available funds for additional grants and loans as of the end of September. And this is a drop from last month because we had set up a reserve for $200,000 for the Exec 1 expansion. Okay. And then finally, the grant report shows that we have 39 active grants and 6 grants that are in the application process at this point. And I don't have anything further for you on the financial report. If you have any specific questions, I can certainly try to answer those for you.
Anybody on the board have any questions for the finance director about the financials?
Maybe the first time I don't.
Excellent. Is there anybody
I'm starting to understand it.
Is there anybody who's in attendance who has any questions about the financials? I guess that I will note, just in conclusion, that we're going to be meeting as a select board pretty much every Tuesday from now until Christmas. And in the next week or two, I think it's the next week, we're going to begin discussing publicly the budget development process. And that will probably begin in part with a discussion of our revenues before turning to proposed expenses. And so it is an opportunity for anybody who wants to have more information about the budget development process and what we're bringing in and what we're spending and what we're planning to do over the course of the next year to be involved. So we encourage anybody who's interested to come to our meetings going forward. In the past, we've had budget discussions sometimes at off hours, 7 o'clock in the morning meetings Saturdays and Sundays, but we're going to be making a real effort this year to have all of these budget discussions at 6 or 6:15 meetings during the week that will be televised so that the public can be involved and so that people can come at our regular business hours to be involved in the budget discussion. Peter.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that. The specific dates for kicking off this process are, we'll be distributing the written materials, the actual proposed budget and some other materials with that next Monday. They'll be distributed to the select board members and they'll be posted to the town's website. And then the following Tuesday, on November 10th, is when we'll have the first discussion of the budget here, and there'll be several more to follow throughout November and December.
And if anybody's got any specific budget-related inquiries or priorities, you're welcome to come to Select Board meeting. You're welcome to forward them to anybody on Select Board or to administration, either the town manager, or assistant town manager, finance director. But make sure to let us know what you think, because public input is very important in our development of the budget.
Thank you.
If there's nothing more about our financial report, the next matter on the agenda is an update about the police fire facilities project. There are 2 different sub-items under police fire facilities. The first one is the option agreement, and I will just briefly report that we had been hoping to have an option agreement to present in public in order to protect our ability to purchase property on Black Mountain Road if we decided to move our police facilities up there. We had hoped to have that option contract available for review and approval by the Select Board at tonight's meeting, but unfortunately, the lawyers continue to go back and forth about that agreement. We heard today that town attorney and counsel for the owner of the property have tentatively reached agreement on the language, but still we're waiting for the owner of the property finally to sign off. So we are hopeful. We're this close. We're hopeful that the option contract will be in the select board materials that will be made publicly available on Friday of this week to be considered at our first regular November 2015 meeting on November 3rd. But we are working towards completion of that option agreement, hopefully to finalizing that and having that available for public input. The second item, anybody have any questions about that option agreement? Or any comments? So then the next item under Police Fire Facilities Project has to do with dates and locations of public meetings. I think what I'm going to ask Peter to do, for starters, is to just talk about the process we went through to select those dates and potential locations and what we have to present. And then I think I'll talk a little bit about just what the purpose of those meetings is going to be.
Sure. So we coordinated with not just the select board, but several members of staff, key members of the police department and the fire department, professionals who've been assisting the town with this process, as well as BCTV and the interpreters, and so a lot of different calendars to make sure are lined up so that we could go out and hold 3 public meetings in relatively close proximity to one another, but not all, in 3 successive days. So there'd be both the opportunity for people to go to a different location that might be more convenient for them. If somebody's out of town for a week, we're spreading this over a couple of weeks so that we can accommodate that kind of a conflict. And 2 meetings will be in the evening and 1 on a Saturday morning in order to address those kinds of different aspects of which time would be more convenient for different members of the public. So that's the reason for holding 3 separate meetings. And we coordinated basically all the available dates between now and about the 10th of December that would fall into that kind of a sequence of meetings, and have come up with the following. The first public meeting to present information about the project alternatives and to receive input from the public will be on Saturday morning, November 21st. And that's probably going to be held at Green Street School. That's not 100% confirmed, but it is tentatively confirmed. If it turns out that it can't be held at Green Street School, it will be held at the Gibson-Aiken Center. And we'll be very clear with an update perhaps next Tuesday night here in this setting, as well as getting a news release out to the public about these meetings. Make sure that everybody knows where to go for that meeting once it is 100% confirmed. But that'll definitely happen at 9 a.m. on Saturday, the 21st of November. And then comes the Thanksgiving holiday in between, and then on Monday, November 30th, at 6 p.m., there'll be a meeting at Academy School. And then on Wednesday of that week, December 2nd, also at 6 p.m., a meeting at the Brattleboro Area Middle School.
One clarification, the option that you mentioned that isn't quite ready yet.
Yes.
The purpose of that, I just want to make sure I'm clear, is to allow us to have time to do these meetings and to get all the input we need.
Yes.
And decide what the proposals are going to be, and then put them in front of the town and have the town act on them. In the meantime, the property doesn't get sold.
That's exactly right. The first option period, if it all does fall into place and you approve it and the owner approves it, will provide until March 31st of next year for all of those activities to go on. And then only if it is leading towards what looks like it's going to be an actual purchase of the property would there be any extension of that option beyond March 31st.
Thank you.
And we have 2 3-month additional options if the contract is approved.
Yep.
So, I don't know that we have to take any action because we've already agreed to go forward with 3 public meetings to talk about police fire facilities. But I just want to make sure that we're clear that there's a range of alternatives that we're going to be fully prepared to talk about and to share information about with everybody in the community. And those will include the current cost to build out the project as it was originally approved about 2.5 years ago, through lower price alternatives that would include moving the police department up to a location on Putney Road. And then we'll also talk about what would be the cost of basic life safety improvements that absolutely have to happen, because we can't continue to forward with our police fire facilities in their current state without making certain improvements. And our goal is to collect input as broadly as possible from members of the community so that the select board can make a decision about what we're going to recommend, whether it's going to be alternatives or a single option, and then how we're going to present that back to the town for approval, whether by vote of the entire electorate or town meeting or some combination of those. So we're inviting everybody to participate. We've got 3 different meetings that have been scheduled. I wonder, Peter, whether it is possible to do some sort of mailing to all households, just like we did with Pay As You Throw, with a quick postcard noting that we're having 3 public meetings about police fire. If you can come back to us at the next select board meeting with the cost of that and with a proposed format for a mailing like that, we'd like to make sure that everybody knows this is happening so that everybody's got a chance to provide input. Does that sound okay to everybody on the board?
I'm going to be a broken record about that, we have 3 meetings. You have to at least go to one of them. I mean, it's really mandatory that we get as much input from as many people in the populace as we can, just so that there isn't any unanswered questions out there. And if anybody has any concerns, now's the time. We have 3 meetings. You should be able to make one.
And we will be ready to take questions that you have on November 21st with the goal of trying to have them answered by the 30th or the 2nd. And if there are additional questions on the 30th or the 2nd, we'll make all efforts to answer them thereafter. But we are busy in the process of making sure that administration and our consultants are ready to provide this information to the public about all aspects and all alternatives with respect to this police fire. And it was one of our goals for the year to get this project back on track in one form or another. And we certainly are anticipating moving towards likely a town meeting, maybe before the March town meeting, to approve a scope of the police fire project going forward. And it's one of the items on our work plan, and we want to hear from everybody about that. Is there anybody else on the board who's got anything about police fire?
Enough is enough.
Anybody who's in attendance? Yes, ma'am. Tell us your name, please.
I'm Louise Zach. I'm a new resident of Brattleboro. So I was not aware of what happened a few years ago. And I would encourage you, when you pull together your materials, to come up with something like what I would call an executive summary or a chart of options. I have read everything that's come out, and I will be at one of the meetings, but I think you need to use social media, put something on. I know the memo itself is on the town website, but it would help a lot, I think, to see those 4 options that you mentioned, what the cost is for each one. It would be helpful, I think, to see the preference of the police department, because I changed my whole mind based on what, every piece of my mind, I changed it based on what the police chief said at one of these meetings. So I think that's an important piece of information people should have right up front. And I also think that the impact on the town tax rate of each option would be very helpful to have in a chart. So I appreciate how important this is. I appreciate that you want town discussion. Please don't put all your hope on those 3 meetings, because a lot of people can't or won't come to meetings, but people do go to the website, or they go to the Commons, or they go to iBrattleboro. I don't know if the town has a Twitter account, but something like that I would encourage.
Thank you. Anybody else who's in attendance have anything that they want to comment about the police fire project? So we'll look forward at the meeting in the beginning of November to hopefully seeing the option contract and then to seeing a form of written mailer so that we can approve that as well. Next item on tonight's agenda is the Planning Department Engineering Services contract for the Brownfields grant work. I assume that Rod and Sue are going to talk with us about that?
She's got more plans than I.
Greetings.
Good evening.
You look serious.
So you have before you a memo.
Tell us your names, please.
Again.
I know
I'm
you.
Rod Francis, I'm the planning director.
I'm Sue Killian, I'm the planner.
We're here to talk about the Brownfields program contracts with 3 pre-qualified environmental professionals or firms, and you have in your packets a memo that gives some background. We're at the beginning of building the administrative structure for the Brownfields program in the town. And to do that, one of the things that we need to do is identify qualified environmental professionals who can conduct site assessment and or undertake area-wide planning activities as needed. Because of the nature of Brownfields work, it frequently happens at the point where there's interest in a land transaction, and so time's of the essence. As a way of minimizing the startup time for a project such as this, what we've chosen to do, which is follow EPA guidance, and that is we circulated an RFQ which identified our needs as per our procurement policies. We received 12 responses. We eliminated 6 of those 12 responses on the basis of staff review and committee review. We elected to interview 6, and of the 6 interviews that we conducted, we decided to recommend to you 3 firms to enter into a contract such that once the site enters the program, we'll send a brief RFP out to the 3 pre-identified firms. They'll each respond in strict terms regarding price, availability, and their technical capacity to work on the site given its character. The steering committee and staff will make a recommendation as to which one would be retained, and then the work would commence. In the instance of the work commencing with a preliminary assessment of phase 1 and then moving into a phase 2, we'd have the option to extend the work with the firm if we were satisfied with the work that they were doing, because that's a time savings and it reduces sort of friction because they already have knowledge of the site and they're already mobilized. So we have 2 recommendations, 2 potential motions. The first is authorize the town manager to enter into an environmental services contract with Terracon Consultants Inc., Sanborn Head and Associates Inc., and Ellie Environmental LLC to provide environmental services to the Brattleboro Brownfields program. These are the 3 firms that we selected from the process.
Can you tell us what distinguished these 3 firms and why we think that they're a good choice to do this work?
Each of the 3 familiar with the geology and development patterns of Brattleboro and similar towns. Each of them have good access, they have offices within an hour's drive or 2 hours drive. They are well known to people involved in the Brownfields program in the state, and they come highly recommended from their previous, from work with previous programs. And each of them offered specific services that were seeking either strong knowledge of the local area and or some technical services to do with defining and characterizing the underground contamination that we're interested in seeing.
Rod, are there any of them in Vermont?
Yes.
Yes, Ellie Environmental is based in Vermont. It's a 2-person small firm.
Yep.
Sanborn Head is based in New Hampshire, and Terracon is a national firm but with an office in Manchester.
Any other questions from anybody on the board? Is there anybody in attendance who has any questions about our consideration of pre-qualifying these three firms? Anything else that you all want to add?
No, just that once we're done with this, we're going to move on to the next one.
Oh, no, I remember.
That's okay.
That's all. All right, well, I guess we're probably ready for a motion.
I move to authorize the town manager to enter into an environmental services contract with Terracon Consultants, Inc., Sanborn Head Associates, Inc., and La Environmental LLC to provide environmental services to the Brattleboro Brownfields program.
We have a motion to pre-qualify these three firms. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. And now, if you could talk to us about the second motion.
Okay, so as I outlined just a moment ago, a typical work project would commence with what is called a phase one assessment, which is for the most part historical research on prior uses of a site. And then in the instance that that information and some preliminary site work turns up the presence of contaminants or the likelihood of contaminants, then that we would be in a situation where we would authorize what is referred to as a phase two, which would use various technical procedures to establish the type and extent of contamination in the soils with a view to coming up with a corrective action plan. And so the average price of a phase one runs in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. Phase two, it's more difficult to price because of the specifics of the site, but it's considerably more, somewhere between high 20s and the low 40s. So because the alternative would be to back out and then spend some months formulating an RFP, circulating an RFP, having all possible firms respond, then selecting a firm, then going into contract with the firm. This could be actually more than 3 or 4 months. And so because it's typically wrapped around real estate transactions or other opportunities to redevelop the site and or have just identified contaminants that are of public health concern, we would prefer to have the town manager be able to execute task orders with one of the pre-qualified firms under the environmental services contract, which could exceed the authorized amount of $10,000.
John?
So, Rod, that comes out of the 400,000,
Yeah, correct.
right? So that's
Right. So it's isolated from the general fund.
right,
It's dedicated funds.
right.
We would be making the contractual commitments and undertaking the technical work in accordance with EPA's specifications, and that's the full extent of the request in terms of the town manager's authority to authorize.
Right. So we have a grant of 400,000.
Yes, 2 pools of $200,000.
Right. And so, you know, we're, I don't know, are we hoping to use all that or not
Yes.
hoping?
Yes.
Yes.
Totally,
Yeah.
within 3 years.
Yep. Okay.
And if we're in the $20,000 to $40,000, $45,000 range, we would hope that if each of these went to phase one and phase two, we could do somewhere between 10 and 15.
Exactly. Right.
And the lack of competitive bidding is consistent with EPA and other applicable guidelines.
Yes, it is.
May I just clarify
Yeah,
that it's the competitive process that's just occurred by which the proposing firms were screened and then the 3 were recommended to you tonight is the element of wide open competition that is appropriate for this and sets the stage for the 3 pre-qualified firms then to be the ones who are bidding on and selected to do the actual individual pieces of work. And it's for that reason, because you are approving, have just approved this evening, the selection process that led to the 3, and because of the need to be agile and responsive at times in these processes and not delay the beginning of a phase of work that one of the 3 consultants would do on one of the 10 or 15 projects, that we'd like you to authorize me to go when necessary beyond my usual limit of $10,000 and execute what's necessary in order to keep them moving and responsive.
I take it we'll be getting reports back to us about those approvals.
It'll all
as
be
promptly as possible.
fully transparent. You'll know who we're contracting with for which jobs and for how much money and all of that. It would just save the step of having to line all of that up and get it on an agenda and perhaps lose a week or 2 in the process before they can get out in the field and do the work.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments?
Right, do we know how many sites roughly we have around the Brattleboro area? I mean, somebody just mentioned 10 or 15. I mean, do we?
We have, because there's 2 pools of funds, and one of them, one of those pools of funds is dedicated to petroleum-based contamination,
Right.
which is associated with gas stations and auto repairs facilities. Yep. We clearly have more than 15 potential sites that would qualify. So we feel that we can expend the funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know of at least 4 sites that are under kind of consideration, 2 of which I've spoken with prospective purchasers on, so.
And are those outside the oil or they're still in that group?
One would likely be under
Yeah.
the petroleum and one probably under the hazardous.
Okay.
But, yeah, that still remains to be seen.
But there's also been historically in Brattleboro issues with off-site petroleum
Right.
contamination running down Canal Street.
Exactly.
So that there's a risk of contamination
Some distance.
not directly
Directly
related to
associated
the
with the site.
gasoline facilities
Right.
because it was flowing towards the river.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, so the geology here is, and topography makes assessment more important and also more difficult to predict
Yeah.
the extent of the contamination.
That was a huge grant for us to get.
Right.
Ms. McLaughlin.
I just wanted to mention, because the public should be aware that not only is this good for the health and safety of the town, but also a great benefit to the development community to redevelop some properties that are tricky to redevelop. And it was fun finding just the right consultants.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I didn't ask Rod for more detail about the screening process, but I did see you midday after all those interviews, and it sounded like it had been a long morning.
Yes.
Any other questions from anybody on the board, or any other comments from anybody on the board? Is there anybody who's in attendance, anybody else who's in attendance, who's got any comments or questions about this request to authorize the town manager to exceed the $10,000 standard authority for approving contracts? Well, then we're ready for motion.
To delegate to the town manager the authority to execute task orders with pre-qualified firms under each environmental service contract.
Even when the amount of such task orders exceeds $10,000?
Yes, friendly.
Thank you. So we have a motion to authorize town manager to execute task orders in excess of $10,000. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining? It carries 5-0. Thanks for your work on that. It's a very exciting project. The next matter on the agenda is the public hearing for the proposed zoning amendment, proposed zoning code, land use regulations amendments. I guess what I'll do is I will, at this point, open the public hearing on the proposed zoning code, land use regulation amendments. I'll talk a little bit about the procedure we're going to be using going forward. The adoption of a new land use regulation code is a very significant point in the life of the town. The subdivision and zoning regulations we've been operating under have been in effect, Rod, what's it been, at least 20 years?
Just before the next one, the last World Series.
Great. So I happen to know when that was, 1985. So the zoning ordinance has been in effect about 30 years. And we've had a complete rewrite proposal that's been presented. There's been numerous public hearings and public proceedings before the Planning Commission at various public events to gather comments. And most recently, the Planning Commission approved the final draft for presentation to the Select Board. The applicable law requires the Brattleboro Select Board to hold one public hearing in order to consider the new proposed zoning ordinance before we decide how to proceed. The Select Board decided to hold 2 public hearings, one tonight, and the second public hearing is
2 weeks from tonight. On the
2
10th.
weeks from tonight on November 10th. So our goal is, and the process we're going to use tonight is that we're going to hear from the planning director, the planner, and the consultant. We want to welcome Ms. Saxton also to the table, along with Rod and Sue. They're going to give us a brief overview about how we've gotten here. And thank you, Sue, for that technical assistance.
Yeah, we'll see.
And they're going to give us a overview of how we got here and the substance of the land use regulations. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome all members of the Planning Commission who are here for attending our meeting. And maybe each of you would introduce yourselves, because this has been a huge project that you've worked on. Would each of you stand up and introduce yourselves? Sorry.
I'm Elizabeth McLaughlin, I'm Chair of the Planning Commission.
James Valenti, Vice Chair of the Planning Commission.
Rachel Zayward. Kathy Hertford.
So I want to thank each of you for all the work that you've done on these zoning regulations. We know it's been a huge effort getting us to this point, and we're really indebted to you for the work that you've done on these proposed regulations. So we're going to hear from members of staff and our consultant. If anybody from the Planning Commission wants to speak to the land use regulations, and then we're going to take public comment from anybody who's in attendance on these proposed land use regulations. We're then going to do it all again on November 10th, hearing from anybody who wants to be heard on these regulations. And then I think we have the opportunity either to vote on November 10th or to make a decision to vote at a later date. Would that be fair to say, Sue?
Yes.
So on November 10th, if the Select Board is satisfied that we're ready to go, we may vote at that time on approval of these regulations. We may decide to defer the vote to another date. We could decide to have another public hearing. And our choices at the time we vote will be either to approve these regulations as presented, to approve them with minor changes, or to send them back to the Planning Commission to make more substantive changes. So these are now being presented for public approval as soon as we figure out how to get the PowerPoint working. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Unless there's somebody on the board who's got something to say, or the town manager's got something to
Got a
say.
couple students could probably take care of it.
It's true.
Something about it going dormant for a while because it was set up.
All right, well, if we can start, if we can, without
Yes.
the PowerPoint.
That's fine.
If you wanna, and as soon as the
Right.
PowerPoint's ready, we can go back through it.
So let me just go back and give a little bit of background. I'm drawing from the memo that was provided to you in your packets. as I pointed out in the introduction, it was in the mid-1980s that the last time we adopted a new set of land use regulations in Brattleboro. In the document, the contents of the existing document probably date back as far as the mid to late 1970s. A lot has changed in that time, not the least of which is, here we go, the way we would actually go about presenting the document. Thanks, Jeff. Oops, spoke too soon. And so the work that you see before you tonight and the work that we've presented to you in 5 separate sessions in the last 6 months is based on work that was actually done as part of the 2013 town plan, which itself was a multi-year project. And so the degree of public outreach and the degree of connection with the community around community standards is long and deep when it comes to this project. Are we good?
Don't anybody touch
Thank you,
it.
Jeff.
Don't breathe.
We're not
We're
breathing.
forever indebted to BCTV as well.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So, in those 30 years, lots of things have changed. Town plan goals have changed, in sometimes in very specific ways, and sometimes in more general ways. Development trends in town and the region have changed, and best practices in planning and development have changed. Also, we've seen considerable shift in federal and state statutes, and also sometimes contradictory, but nevertheless important case law developments in land use and more generally community planning issues.
So we keep talking about the 2013 town plan, but it's important because there does need to be a relationship between a town's land use regulations and the town plan. So the town plan is really the base, and then the land use regulations need to conform with it. So during the town plan process, we spent a lot of time and a lot of public outreach on defining what are the natural, cultural, and built form assets in Brattleboro, and what are some of the environmental, social, and economic challenges that we're facing. And so we tried to keep those all in mind as we wrote these land use regulations, because we really wanted them to reflect what are the values and the aspirations, and then making the most of these assets, but also addressing challenges. In 2014, we started working with Brandy Saxton from Place Sense, and basically this graphic shows kind of a typical process. Again, it starts with the town plan, and then our consultant went through a lot of our documents, looking at what they said, looking at what our existing regulations had. So that's kind of the scoping part, and then made some suggestions that the Planning Commission went through in the diagnostic part. We worked on writing them. In the midst of writing them, we went out to the public. We've got some feedback, continued to write, and now we're kind of in the adoption process with more with public hearings where there's more public feedback. And I'm going to turn it over to Brandy, who will talk a little bit about the public outreach that we did.
So I think Sue mentioned the starting with the town plan, and so this really builds upon the public outreach that was done there. So that public outreach fed into the process as well. And as we started working forward, we had a project website that we kept up to date, not perhaps daily updates on that website, but as we had material, we kept putting up drafts, maps. We have, I think a feature with maps, people could sort of zoom in and see their property and get a good understanding of what was there. In January and February, we did a whole series of community meetings, forums, different venues and formats to try to get information out to people so they were aware of what was going on with the rezoning. We had some nice graphics and summaries, little brief things that people could pick up, handouts that sort of helped explain what was going on with the zoning districts. Got feedback through that process, went back, that was sort of after the first draft was available, and we went back, did more refining, and had another round of public feedback and information coming to us. I think as we were putting together some of the responsive materials of questions and responses, I think we're well over 200 comments that we received and responded to during the process. So in addition to that public side of the feedback, we were also Obviously, the Planning Commission was involved on a bi-weekly basis in shaping this. We reached out to other town boards as well and town staff. We heard from the land use and development community quite extensively, and we also got feedback from regional planning and state agencies as well. So there was a lot of levels of feedback and response to the process throughout.
You may have seen that we produced a document that compiled the public comments, questions, kind of detailed some of the decision-making of the Planning Commission. But we threw this graphic up. Basically, we're on our third draft. So our first draft came out January 17th of 2015. And that had a lot of, there were a lot of changes that resulted in draft number 2, which was the Planning Commission hearing draft of August 10th. And then there was a lot of action taken by the Planning Commission based on feedback at the hearings. And the draft before the Select Board tonight is the October 1st, 2015 draft. So that's the third one that has been out there for the public. But definitely a lot of feedback, a lot of changes occurred between January and August. And then I would say considerable change occurred from the Planning Commission hearings as well.
So the consistency with the town plan is an important aspect of the land use regulations. There's a so-called consistency doctrine in Vermont statute, which requires that there be minimal discord between land use regulations and the town plan. The town plan has some broad but statutorily recognized land use regulatory functions. And the land use regulations are supposed to be an explicit documentation and structured approach to ensuring that the goals enunciated in the town plan around land use and community planning goals are implementable. So what we've developed here is in response to what was identified as part of the town plan process. They're contemporary regulations. They promote environmental development principles. They explicitly seek to improve design in commercial and mixed-use districts. It includes a simplified plan unit development process. It's designed to enhance and support the Brattleboro's downtown, and overall it's supposed to reduce the number of zoning districts, which it does. Some of the key features can be seen in this slide. I should point out that the graphics that you're seeing as part of the presentation tonight, for the most part, these drawings are drawn from the document themselves. And so in that it conveys what we're illustrating here by using those graphics is that the document itself is graphically rich and has detailed information that should assist applicants in the process. So we have developed some new zoning districts and adjusted most of the boundaries of prior or previously existing zoning districts. There's a reduction in the total number. There's more clear distinction between the districts, while there's a broadening of the set of both permitted and conditional uses within the districts. Thus moving us towards a land use regulation format that is consistent with contemporary practice, but is also consistent with the land use patterns that we have in Brattleboro. And it's forward-looking specifically in the design, engineering, and technical standards, where we foresee strong regulatory changes coming from the federal and state government, but also recognition on the part of the broader community that climate change and other major environmental conditions will be changing the way we view the development process and making sure that Brattleboro's regulations are compliant with new federal and state standards.
Other features are that it's a unified document, so both the zoning regulations and the subdivision regulations are in the one document. So there's just one. instead of having to go to two different places. And this helps streamline some of the review and kind of consolidate it in one document. It's got a different organization. So you can't look at Chapter 230 and the existing zoning and see the same thing, but we think it's much more user-friendly in the way that it's set up. There have been changes to some of the review processes. We've talked about simplifying the PUD. That would just go before the Development Review Board, so the Planning Commission and the Select Board are no longer involved in that process. Waivers, so waiver of dimensional standards, the criteria is, there's only 3 criteria now. It's easier criteria to meet, but we're much more specific in what you can get a waiver for with dimensional. So maybe you can get within 5 feet of the side setback, but not within 1, where right now it's much more open. And then the subdivision process, we're taking some conservation subdivision approaches, especially in the rural parts of town where we want people to engage with what are the natural features on the property, and let's not be stuck with a cookie cutter subdivision approach. We're going to give some flexibility and recognition of there's some constraints, but there's also some special features to your land. So let's design around that. And there's greater environmental protection. So there's wetlands, steep slopes, riparian areas. Right now we only have buffers on the Connecticut River and the West River, but we have lots of other streams in town. And so more consistent with state guidance, there's different size buffers, but they apply to all water bodies.
So, again, the land use regulations as presented respond to community expectations. It embodies smart growth principles. It's responsive around the question of sustainability and climate change. It encourages fiscal responsibility by focusing development in the areas where development is already present. It minimizes and evaluates new development in rural parts of town from the standpoint of the delivery of town emergency services and other services. It provides for stewardship of the historic built form and the natural assets that we have. It takes new strides in achieving the protection of health and safety of the citizens and property owners, and it's intended to improve the quality of development in direct response to the comments that we received from the public during the town planning process and this process. And so with that, unless there are any questions, we're happy to allow for the opening of the public hearing.
Thank you. So with that overview, I will note that as Rod and Sue and Brandy explained, the land use regulations have been the subject of 5 meetings that we've had at Select Board, where we had separate presentations about the land use regulations, and then we had one follow-up meeting to address additional open questions. And before asking the board if there's anything that we want to inquire about or any comments we want to make, I'd like to give the opportunity to any members of the Planning Commission, if any of you want to say anything at the beginning of this public hearing. No need, but if you're interested, this would be a good time. You can do it later too, but you get to go first if you want to.
Thanks, Liz.
I just wanted to say that I think that all the Planning Commission is very grateful to our staff and our consultant. And also that our goal was to have regulations that are a benefit to the town as a whole and individual neighbors and abutters. And while we welcome redevelopment and development in town, none of us looked towards any specific property. None of us have any skin in the game. The goal is for the benefit of the town as a whole.
Thank you. Anybody on the board got anything right now?
Oh, I'm just anxious to hear from people.
Right. So if anybody has any comments about the land use regulations, any questions about the land use regulations, that's the purpose of this public hearing. We have not gone through tonight the land use regulations chapter and verse, because we've done that in many different public forums, but we're ready to address and have addressed any specific questions you may have, any broad questions you may have, or to take any comments that anybody's got. So the mic is open for anybody who wants to make any comments. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know exactly.
You want to come to the mic and say your name?
I don't like to speak in public, but in any case, my name is Dana Holby, and I abut the Commonwealth Dairy. And the rezoning is a very large issue for us, has been since we were approached by them in May. It's been a long process, and it's a deterrent to them to have it take so long, and don't know whether it's a done deal at this point. But we have lived now in the shadow of this giant factory for the 5 years that they've been there. They're great, but obviously we might be ready to move on. So this rezoning is a large piece of our life at this point. And I just wanted to make that statement.
Is there anything specific that you have any concerns about besides that general issue that you want us to take account of?
I think that they are intending to use our property, should they be buying it, for something that is significant to them, in good taste, would be good for the town for sure. They are a very well-established company. They have plants in other parts of this country and in Germany, and I feel I have come to terms with parting, not parting with Brattleboro ever, but parting with this. So that's what I have to say. I don't know. I support them, and I support the town in rezoning them. I didn't support the town when the factory was in the process of building, and yet here we are.
So Dana, I just want to be clear in my head. You're in support of the changes
I am now.
that they've made, especially in your neighborhood, or
in my neighborhood.
in your
yes.
neighborhood. Okay.
Yes, I think it makes sense. It's rural, residential, abutting an industrial factory that's enormous. So it makes sense to me.
Well, for someone that doesn't like to speak in public, you did fine.
Well, thank you very much. I'll sit down now, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dana. I guess what we're going to do going forward, if there's specific inquiries to anybody who stands up and give us any comments or questions, that's a fine way to proceed. But would also like to hear as to any comments that are made, what the planning department has to respond, and we'll leave it to you to decide whether you want to address them at the end or as they arise. So it's really up to you.
Thank you.
I don't know that I need your comment at each one,
Right.
but at the end, we'd certainly like to hear from you if you got any comments. Anybody else? You just make sure to give us your names. That mic doesn't amplify for the room, but it picks up for the television.
Great. So I'm Cassandra Holloway. I'm with the Brattleboro Area Prevention Coalition. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Cassandra.
I'm hoping I'm at the right meeting. Brian told me to come, Brian Bannon, because I called him back in the spring. He came and talked with our Vermont Kids Against Tobacco about the window signage ordinance, which currently is that any sign placed inside or upon a window facing the outside and intended to be seen from the exterior, that's defining what a window signage is. And it said that it should, a business may use 2 of its windows for sign purposes, provided the total amount of each window covered with signage does not exceed 30% of the window total glass area. And so we're trying to figure out what that meant, because we did see, the VCAC group did see that some had more signs on different, more windows than 2 windows, sometimes more than 30%. And at the time, Brian explained to us that the definition of windows wasn't very clear. Therefore, when we looked at businesses with multiple panes, such as the gas stations, that wasn't really clear if that was one window, if it was 3 panes. So he said that there was going to be some changes made to it. At the select board, as you remember, our VCAT kids were talking about how asking you to enforce the current ordinance, as well as to share that studies have been shown that tobacco marketing exposure to youth, it has increased likelihood of usage among our teens. And now with the e-cigarettes and vaporizers, I don't know if you've noticed, there definitely there's a higher prevalence of that now. So I guess I've been told that the proposed ordinance states that it's changing to no more than 25% of any ground level window that may be obscured by signs, whether permanent or temporary, whether on the interior, exterior of the window, and whether physically mounted on the window or otherwise mounted so as to be primarily viewed through the window. So we're both BAPC, Brattleboro Area Prevention Coalition, and the Vermont Kids Against Tobacco request that when you're looking at changing this ordinance, please consider if that's going to help reduce signage in these places that are marketing tobacco and alcohol. And because if you think about the gas stations again, usually the whole front is windows. And especially our concern is around there's many gas stations and supermarkets and such by the high school and the middle school. So we're happy that it's decreasing to 25. We're concerned that it's going from 2 windows to any windows. So I just asked for 2 considerations, that the ordinance either remains at 2 or maybe even less, and that there is a clearer definition of what a window is. And I just wanted to bring up Mel Storm from the VCAT group to read something too.
This is a letter to the select board by her, but everybody they have signed it, so it's in the VCAT group. We would like to request that the town of Brattleboro consider how the window signage ordinance change will impact the amount of tobacco marketing we will be exposed to. According to Vermont Department of Health's Counterbalance VT campaign, the more often children are exposed to tobacco ads, the more likely they are to start smoking. Retail stores are the primary place where tobacco companies recruit new tobacco users, and nearly 90% of those new users are underage youth. Tobacco advertisement is more influential on teenage smoking than peer pressure. Many tobacco and alcohol retailers, for example, gas stations, are fronted with many large side-by-side window panes. Please make sure that any changes to the ordinance help in reducing window signage rather than to increase it. BAM's VCAT kids are working to reduce the amount of tobacco marketing in our community, especially near our schools. We ask that any changes made to the window signage zoning ordinance help our efforts rather than hinder them. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I did write that, but Melanie just said that she's going to make sure all the VCAT kids write individually to you. So, and I will not write those.
Thank you.
You are now.
And so I think what I'll do is I'll ask Rod or Sue or Brandy to speak to how the ordinance currently addresses those concerns, so that our youngest attendee can head out and do whatever he wants to do as soon as we're finished with this topic.
I'm just going to open the conversation with the observation that we can't control the content or the type of sign for reasons to do with free speech. And so the question is broader than tobacco and alcohol products. It's all possible reasons you could have a sign. And so it is a slight tightening, and I think the question of how many windows it's on is kind of open, for discussion. But what I would say is that the way the language is now framed, it's the total area that we're trying to limit, and in most cases it's more restrictive. But I'm going to hand it over to Brandy and see what her work with other communities can do for shedding light on this topic.
So the question of window signs is often a major enforcement issue and thorn in the side of zoning administrators everywhere because they can so easily come and go, which is one of the problems with regulating the number of them, is that the number is highly variable. And from a land use perspective, not getting at the messaging of what the signs are saying is really about maintaining visibility into the building from the street to maintain the pedestrian-friendly streetscape that we want in the downtown. And so for that reason, we're really focusing on the amount of coverage of the windows, reducing that down, and trying to get away from chasing down the number of signs and more of the administrative headaches that go along with that. So that's the philosophy behind the reworking of the language.
Can I then follow up and just inquire about the issue that Cassandra and Mel raised about the number of windows? I don't recall that issue in the prior or the current version of the zoning ordinance and how that compares to the new version, although I do remember you all talking about it last time you were here. So if you could talk a little bit about how the ordinance changes from what it was to what is now proposed.
Well, if we get rid of the number of windows and we're just talking about area, it doesn't really matter whether it's 4 panes in one window or 4 windows with 1 pane each, because we're really just talking about how much of the total area is covered. But typically words like window don't get defined in regulations because they have a standard dictionary, meaning that unless you wanted it to be differently defined or it needed more specificity, it should not necessarily be an issue that you would need to define window.
So we define window as window. It's not.
Could it be defined as glass? Instead of getting away from the window, I mean glass area?
Well, actually, I don't want to be smart, but it's not always the case that it's got glass in it. So we're just going to leave it at window. So we don't want to.
Because window is specific.
Yes, but we're measuring window area and we're using the commonly accepted definition of what constitutes a window. So if it's a gas station, for instance, and it's floor to ceiling plate glass for the entire front of the store, we're going to measure that as all window.
Right.
And then they get 25% of that to put a sign in, no matter what. So
I don't know, as a builder, I would never think of that as a window. I would think of that as glass area. But that's
right.
And so and I know it's probably hard to separate the two. But.
Right.
So can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
You have one giant
pane of glass,
what we are calling a window.
Yes.
And you can put a sign, like you can use 25% of that, whatever that thing is.
Yes.
For a sign. And what you're saying is if it was divided into, instead of one giant pane of glass, it's like those 3 back here.
Yes.
You would still take the total of that,
Yes.
and they could only put 25%.
Correct.
So it could be like 3 little signs as opposed
Yes,
to
they
one
get
giant
25%. They can allocate it however they see fit across the window area.
Okay. But it's really just the
total.
Right.
Okay.
Glass.
Okay.
So it's not a.
So you couldn't fill each of these 3 panes of
25%.
glass.
No,
25%.
that would be more than 25% for the total area.
Okay.
Right.
I think the issue here, that's all very interesting. The issue here is tobacco signs.
He's gonna go crazy.
It's tobacco signs on the windows. And I think the answer is we can't really do much about it other than that little bit of regulation. But I suspect that you have already talked to a lot of these merchants and asked them to not advertise
And they have contracts with the tobacco companies that prevent them from doing anything about it, which is why we see that.
That explains it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would think that would be pretty
But
effective
sometimes the
if a bunch of kids went in there and said, stop
And I
it.
know that it can be specific to a particular product. However, I just want to make sure that any change to the zoning ordinance
Doesn't make it
not
worse.
allow them to increase that marketing.
Thanks.
Donna?
Cassandra, do you know how frequently those contracts with the tobacco company are negotiated?
No, but I could find that out for you.
I'm also thinking of stores like CVS and some of the pharmacies that have discontinued selling alcohol and tobacco. And I wonder if they could be local allies in how
We don't have, yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a CVS, so they don't really have any investment per se. Right. I think any in this area. I just ask for caution in that it may be beneficial in other areas, but it might also end up being a great opening for tobacco and alcohol advertisers. So like right now, we have more space to work with, and we can't do anything on our end to counter that. So anything we can do to help you in looking into that, please, I'll look into it myself. But again, if you have 4 panels of glass, I would like to think of that as being a window, 4 windows, not just one. And at this point, it's not defined that way. It's one window. So even if just defining it as a framed glass area as being a window, that would be helpful. So whatever you can do, we appreciate it. And whatever I can do to help, please ask.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming again, Mel.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
Bye.
See you. Any other comments from anybody who's in attendance about the zoning ordinance? Anybody?
We can't delegate.
Really? Eli?
Yeah, my name's Eli Gould, and I have a couple businesses and properties in town that are related to forest products, and I was warned by Michael Snyder, the head of Forest Parks and Recreation, that we ought to at least reference or ask you guys if you're aware of some statewide legislation that's intended to help well-meaning local zoning and planning officials avoid new regulations that would unduly limit forest products and value-added wood products job creation. And if you're aware of that, or if you have a point person to check in with him on that, it would be pretty timely, because I believe the state legislation is already through. I don't know, I actually don't know the name of the bill and was hoping somebody here would already have been on that. So this is just a point of question.
Well, I don't know if planning staff have yet addressed that. Does anybody on the board know the specifics at this point? We'll ask certainly for follow-up about that to make sure that the ordinance is drafted is consistent with any new statutory provisions relating to encouraging timber industry.
Yeah, I think there's existing rural residential businesses, not just my own at all, which I certainly appreciate the town's support of, but there's other large landowners in the rural residential districts who may have been farmers and may need to or want to switch to some forest products related enterprises, and there are small entrepreneurial value-added wood products. We are the largest kiln dry town east of the Mississippi. We're the largest timber county in Windham County. We're all about job creation in many ways, and it would be, I think, a mistake to take a stance that would limit businesses like this. And I think that anything in the zoning that really gets to the heart of, are we bothering our neighbors? Are we conforming to standards of practice and noise, and what we're doing at our property lines really ought to be the focus, and not getting into unduly banning certain types of businesses that have a great role within rural residential. So,
thank you.
Familiar with that, Rod? Are you familiar with those
I'm not
federal,
particularly.
state,
I'm not familiar with this latest move at the level of the State House, but what I would say is the review of the rural and rural residential districts, is sensitive to protecting agricultural and forest products activity, and pays attention to precisely the things that you have identified, which is appropriate buffering, noise and other nuisance controls, such that so we don't have explicit language preventing specific types of industry such as that. The issue in our land use regulations is more around mitigating any undue impact.
Maybe when you come back on the 10th, you can just talk with us a little bit about how the regulations deal with the types of businesses Eli was talking about. I seem to recall that timber harvest used to be excluded.
It still is.
As a as a regulated industry, isn't that right?
It
Yes,
still
it
is.
still is.
And our regulations reflect that.
Right. All right.
So in other words, the land use regulations are silent on the question of timber harvesting because it's like agriculture, it enjoys state protection.
Thanks, Eli. Thank you. Are there any other comments from anybody who's in attendance about the draft land use regulations? Yes, sir. Tell us your name, please.
I'm Dennis Smith. I guess first I have two questions. One, I hit access on the email to send an email to all of you. Did you get it? There was an email that came addressing the meeting tonight, and on there was a link where I could hit that would, if you want to contact the select board, send it to such and such an email. You hit it, it opens, and then I wrote a very long email to each of you. So nobody got it. 2 days ago.
It was received by Jan Monday and
yesterday.
Yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Dennis,
so it doesn't come directly to the email? It doesn't go directly to you?
I don't know that I've seen it, but the town email addresses, unfortunately, are spam collectors.
Okay, I tried really hard to figure out how to contact everybody, and I thought I was doing it right.
We will make sure that that piece of correspondence gets to all select board members, either from the town manager, secretary, or from the planning department. But please tell us whatever issues you may have.
A slight overview of that.
Please.
But I have a second question first, and that is, this process has been going on since the beginning of the year. I'm sure there's been a lot of work into contacting people, but I almost never talk to anybody who's even heard that it's happening, so I'm not sure how you're letting people know. I know because I'm getting emails because I've gone to the meetings. But my real question is, with whatever participation has happened, has there been any changes in the first draft from that participation?
Yes, so what we have here is a compendium of all public comments, including several of your emails over the span of the project, and broken into two sections corresponding to each of these two drafts. And then a table that shows, identifies each one of those comments or concerns or questions, staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission, including the consultant's view, and then what the Planning Commission's final decision was. Many of the comments and suggestions have led to changes.
Is that available? I know most everything is fairly well laid out on the website. Is that something I could find on the website?
This document here, we've compiled it for this hearing, but I believe...
Okay, so at some later time I could get a copy of it.
There are on the website 2 memos that go through the changes that have been made to the document that correspond to the changes made during this.
And those two memos appear in here also. So Brandy maintained kind of a running list of all changes from draft 1 to draft 2, and then draft 2 to the final draft, which is...
I've spent a lot of time on the website, and I will probably end up spending a lot more time.
Rod, is it possible if anybody wanted a package like this?
There's one available for public viewing tonight, and it'll be available after tonight.
Dave?
Just I'm going to ask Rod to respond to your first question too, because you wouldn't believe how many times people come in and say, gee, I didn't know anything about this.
I know that's a general thing too, yeah.
Yeah, so would you, Rod, go through as many as you can remember of the hearings and communications and other things that were done to advertise this, just for the general public?
Has it been in the paper or the radio or anywhere?
Yes. We've had more than one moment where we've had articles in the Brattleboro Reformer discussing the work of the Planning Commission and the consultant around drafting the new land use regulations. We've conducted multiple off-site meetings at the Winter Farmers Market, before the Rotary Club, both the lunchtime and the breakfast group. We've drawn together local land use professionals involved in land development, and we've developed and built a email list of over 200 unique addresses that Brandy has been sending out emails to for most of the last 2 years while we've been working on this. And the planning commission meetings have been warned, and we've maintained the website, and the planning commission has been steadily working its way through sections of the document now 3 times over effectively. And in that process we've collected substantial comment from stakeholder groups and the general public.
We've also had 5 publicly televised select board meetings where the regulations were discussed and took comment at all of those, and I think at one more meeting too.
Yes, there were 6 in total.
There's 6 in total.
Well, I guess my point is that each of the people that I talk to in town who either know or don't know about the process, many of them have like little specific issues that are specific to them personally. It's, you know, whether you live on one side of Meadowbrook Road or the other, whether you live on one side of Bonnievale Road or the other, whether you own a business on Putney Road who has parking, that parking is not going to be allowed anymore, whether you have a commercial district that's being changed to industrial and you're no longer allowed to do commercial things in it. Everybody's got their own little specific things that are going to be a problem with this. I have lots of big problems, but it's not going to kill me. But I finally got to the point where, yeah, I can listen to all these things, and they can, and a lot of them we won't even know what they are until we go through we live with the document for a while. For example, I was in there a little while ago, just one more time looking, and I discovered that the definition of a sign has changed. It used to be that a sign was something that attracted people off a public highway to your business. Well, it's not that anymore. Little things like that. Now it's anything that will attract somebody from your neighbor's property. So, for example, I have a renewable energy company that has a sign, that can't have a sign on the road, but can have a sign that is seen from the marina and the state building that wasn't considered a sign before. Well, these documents say that the enforcement officer has to enforce these things literally. So that sign for this renewable energy company has to come down because the enforcement officer is told that you can't allow anything to happen, that he has to enforce it literally. But the point is that there's a lot of these things, and some of them help people and some of them hurt people. But I think the bigger issue is that if this is the way we want to go, then this group has done a very professional job of creating something that's a little easier to read, a little easier to find things, but stricter, creating more difficult hoops to jump through. And I grew up in this town, and I know that the town really hasn't grown, and it always has a revenue issue. And we had a small business Saturday thing here. And I think a small business in Brattleboro should be a small business 365 days a year, not a small business Saturday. And there hasn't been much growth. There hasn't been much increase in revenue. I think our problems with jobs and housing are because development has become increasingly more difficult in the town. Not only for people who own a residence and want to add a porch or change their house in some way, but from the point of view of businesses who just get overwhelmed, and this is going to make it more overwhelming because it's stricter, in jumping through the hoops to make any changes. if I make any changes to my properties, because the enforcement officer has to do everything literally with this document, I'm not going to be able to afford to do everything that the document asks for. I personally, living in this town growing up in this town, having businesses for 40 years, think that instead of getting more and more professional, as we get more and more professional and more strict in what we're doing, the town grows less and less. If we want no growth, great. But I think we would be better to cut what we had in half and get out of the way of the businesses and let them develop and create jobs and more businesses and be creative instead of making it more difficult for everybody. So if we want to continue in the direction we're going, these guys have done a great job. But I don't think we should go the other way. I think we should think out of the box and just get out of the way of people who want to create jobs and housing and make it easier in the town rather than going this direction.
So, Dennis, before you sit down, signage is, I think, since I've been in town for almost 40 years, I think signage has been a problem since day one. Either trying to enforce it or trying to figure it out. I think that's a well-made point. What my concern is, because you and I have talked a lot about this, what my concern is there some aspect of all this that has really got your ire up? I mean, is there something that specifically?
It's the death by 1,000 cuts. It's little things. Every time something gets done, it makes it a little more difficult. But specifically, I mean, if I read the document, it's like now to develop something, you have to put up a bond. You have to have regular inspections. You have to have sign-offs. You have to have professional drawings. It costs you a fortune just to get started. You've got to hire a lawyer just to read this document because, yeah, it's supposed to be clearer, but in one part of the document it says one thing, another part of the document it says something else, and one is supposed to overrule the other, but you really don't know until you get into the reality of making it work. So, to me, I don't want to do anything new. It's overwhelming. Thinking about whether to do another development, to start another business, I have to think about it, and then I have to think about how much it's going to cost me to hire all these professionals to do everything. Is it going to go through, or have I wasted a huge amount of money? And then I'm really forced into doing a lot of other things because everything isn't up to the specific requirements for this.
Right.
So if I make one change in a building, then the whole complex has to be changed. I have to change my parking, signage. The thing that scares me is I keep going through and finding little things like the signs. So it's not the signs that are really the big deal. I mean, that's one thing, but what else am I going to find?
Right.
So it's just how frightening the process is. It's gotten more and more difficult every year. I mean, I heard that nothing has happened for 30 years. I don't understand that because I went to probably 20 meetings with when Gary Goodmo chaired doing this a few years ago. So, and that was a pretty big change. So I think that's just kind of been forgotten that was done. But that's it. I mean,
Yeah.
I can sit down and every time I open it, I
Right.
find something else that's going to make my life more difficult and make me less likely to increase what I'm
Right.
doing.
Rod, without getting into specifics, I mean, is this, is this a valid concern? I mean, is it?
We've spoken to Dennis.
Yeah.
Dennis has been one of our regular
Yeah.
attendees,
Yeah.
and he's come with specific concerns, and we've attempted to address them directly each time, and we can do it again now, very briefly. So the definition of a sign, as it occurs, page 523, sign means any device used for visual communication intended to attract the attention of the public and visible from public rights-of-way or other properties. This definition specifically excludes merchandise normally displayed in the storefront window, merchandise displayed or stored outside as approved under these regulations, and public art. So I believe that definition is consistent with what Dennis understands to be the existing definition of a sign.
I'm not sure.
Wait,
You're saying
wait,
that-
Dennis,
I'm
wait a
sorry.
second.
Sorry.
Please let Rod finish.
Right. So my understanding of what Dennis's concern expressed earlier tonight was that we had developed a different definition of sign from one that's visible from a public right-of-way, and I believe that we're still working with that. And then I'm going to set aside the question about what the contributing factors are to Brattleboro's level of growth or economic activity, or the relationship between the regulatory package that we're talking about tonight and those things. But I do want to say that we heard Dennis and others on the question of the standards required for making a submission, an application for a development permit, around the question of A, landscaping and bonds attached to landscaping, and B, the quality or technical level of the drawings. And in both cases, we step back from some earlier language. So the bonding question for landscaping is specific, and it's attached to projects of a certain size. And it's intended to deal with the question of, you seek a permit around about this time of year, you do the work around this time of year, but you hold off doing the planting because they're going to die over the winter. And so in the spring, there's a commitment that you'll do the planting that you were permitted for prior to the winter. And so the bonding is specific and explicit in providing a protection to ensure that that work does take place according, when it's seasonally appropriate. And the question of professional drawings, it's our understanding, it's our experience from being development professionals that once you get into projects of a certain level of complexity, professional drawings are part of the package, because you're hiring an engineer and or architects to help you with the development project overall, and they'll take on the responsibility of developing drawings specifically for the permitting process. And so that's customary. There's a level of activity for small business people and entrepreneurs who want to change a use in an existing building, or do minor changes of an existing building or an existing parcel, and we're not calling for professional drawings in that case, or the professional commitment of landscape architects or similar. So you could show us a planting list and a landscape design that's been developed by a local licensed nursery person, for instance, who's happy to develop those drawings and those planting lists as part of the package of selling you the materials. Similarly with light fixtures and so forth, we've stepped back from those requirements so that you can use commonly available information and material either from the web or from a wholesaler or a retailer of those fixtures, so that you can give us the necessary information so that we can review it. We both understand what it is that you're proposing, but it doesn't require retaining the services of an architect or a landscape architect or an engineer for the drawings.
Okay, so is it kind of fair to say then that if somebody had a proposal and they could easily come in to the planning department and say, geez, guys, can you, or gals or whatever, can you help me clarify what I'm going to need before I get into this?
Sure.
So it's, and Dennis, I understand, because I've been reading through this, and a lot of it is German to me because I don't do this, on a regular basis. So, and I think it is a little bit trial by error, but I just want to make it aware that people can come in with an outline.
Sure.
And say, is this big enough to jump me into into where I'm going to have architectural drawings, or I'm going to have specific things? Or will somebody in the office be able to say, no, you're really not going to need all that. You're going to need X, Y, and Z.
Right. We can provide base layer maps. We can provide information as to where they should go to get the information that they need, and we can show them what our basic expectations are in terms of submitting plans that are robust enough and can be interpreted by the DRB in a dependable way, and then also stand as a record of the work that was done on the site. In this instance, we've got somebody who happens to be both a member of the Planning Commission and chair of the DRB, and I'm going to ask James to speak in a moment on this topic, because in part what we're also responding to is an expressed desire from the Development Review Board that we establish clear guidance on what constitutes a complete application, including the kind of information that's offered, because frequently the DRB is left in a situation where it's attempting to interpret sketches that aren't drawn to scale, sketches that don't have complete information, and applicants who come before the DRB expecting resolution of their development project, but without establishing current conditions or what they propose to do in an adequate way. And so we're trying to walk a balance here between what makes a robust and meaningful record and what makes robust and meaningful evidence that the DRB can render a decision on, and what is also fair and reasonable to ask an applicant to do. And it's not always fair and reasonable to ask an applicant to retain the services of a professional engineer, but we feel that in those circumstances, and when it's a commercial development, that there is key pieces of information that we need. And if James could comment on that, that would be useful.
So I'm the chair of the DRB in addition to being the vice chair of the Planning Commission, and one factor that can actually hold up perfectly meritorious projects has been what we've frequently seen from landowners, hand-drawn or sort of amateur computer drawings of plans that lack scale, that lack detail as to frontage or the placement of the things that we need to evaluate based on whatever ordinance we're approving or disproving the site plan or the appeal or whatever issue that's raised before the DRB.
That's the only thing I ever put in is on a napkin. So I just...
Yeah, we're familiar with your napkins, and so we're asking for a little bit more.
I mean, and
we're happy to help.
Part of the practical result of this will actually be streamlining, I'm quite confident, because a better plan from the DRB means a fairer and quicker adjudication of what is usually a fairly clear ordinance. The biggest challenge we often have is applying the ordinance to a lot that we may not have visited personally, in which the measurements need to be precise, or we need to understand how tall things are, or very basic dimensional stuff that most professionals will put in their plans as a matter of course, but many landowners who are doing a permit process for the first time wouldn't know how to do. That doesn't require hiring an architect necessarily or spending thousands of dollars. It does require an investment to some extent. But generally, if you're developing, you're already investing in a certain extent and have some belief in what you're doing. And this was something that concerned me, but I think the ultimate compromise that is being made in these ordinances will move things faster and allow the DRB to function more as it should and more in favor of what is right under the law.
Thank you, James.
Can I just ask?
Go ahead.
No, Dennis, did that help at all? I mean...
Well, it does.
And you may have to come to the mic just because of the...
And I haven't really had any problems up to now doing what I've done. Small businesses in town kind of know it's a timing issue. You need to know who's on the DRB, who's on the Planning Commission, and who's in the planning office before you decide to go ahead with a project or not, because their personalities make a big difference of whether something is accepted or not. that's neither here nor there. There's nothing anybody can do about that. I haven't really had a problem up to now, but as my grandmother would say, I think we're getting too big for our britches.
Mr. Smith, I want to thank you for your comments. You indicated that there were a number of specific issues that you had and that you were aware that other people had with the ordinances drafted from flipping through it and seeing at various times different provisions. We certainly encourage you, as it sounds like you've done in the past, to continue to submit whatever comments you may have. I certainly anticipate that the Select Board is going to be moving relatively promptly as we get to November 10th to taking a vote on adoption of these ordinances. And so if you've got any specific comments that you want to make, please submit them. Thank you, sir. Anybody else who's in attendance? Mr. LaCroix.
I have had a chance to read the new ordinance, and I've been a real student of the last ordinance. It was written in '88. There were 51 revisions of the last ordinance between '88 and 2013. And all those revisions, I kind of fine-tuned the old ordinance into what we, as town, found were problems with the old ordinance. And I read the town plan. I know it calls for a simplified zoning ordinance. But what I read there is not simpler. There is one less zoning district. However, the requirements, I'm primarily concerned about the commercial districts. The requirements on a new ordinance would certainly prevent me from doing any of the projects I've done to date. I mean, I was at the listers today trying to figure out how the changes in the district will affect my property. I have a property going from the commercial district to the industrial district, for instance, as well as a lot of others. For instance, Agway is also going to go from commercial to industrial. Well, Agway and all the commercial properties in that area are assessed at around $280,000 an acre up there. The abutting property in the industrial zone is assessed at an average of $54,000 an acre. A huge difference in value. I'm not sure why the town would downzone commercial property on Route 5 to what's clearly going to end up being considerably less tax revenue to the town when the properties are reassessed. And that is also my concern on Putney Road. All of the land from Auto Mall to Dennis's Marina is being taken out of the commercial district and is going to be now called neighborhood center. Certainly all of the things that I do on our property, shopping center, is not permitted under the new ordinance in that district. Staples is going to move to a pre-existing non-conforming use, just like we will, which on the face of it doesn't seem like a big deal, but when we try to sell our properties, banks look to make sure that what's happening on the property is a permitted use. And this ordinance moves everybody in that district from this got a commercial use now into a pre-existing non-conforming use, which makes our properties much harder to bank and therefore reduces their value to new buyers. And I think it seems a shame that you're going to move the tax burden from the commercial district to everybody else by downzoning those properties and lessening their value. But one of the most important things I noticed in the new ordinance is it significantly increases the cost or the barrier to entry into Brattleboro commercial real estate. Right now, guys like Dennis and myself have been able to work with the system, develop our properties incrementally, and under the new ordinance, I can't do that. Clearly, when you look at the requirements for the neighborhood center, the new building requirements, where each building has to have no more than 20 feet of a bay, the front of the building needs to return, and they need to be colonnades and fenestrations, all of which he can show you on the projector. All of those things, can't be drawn by a civilian like you and I. This all requires an architect. And Rod says, well, it's commercial. they should expect to pay for an architect and an engineer, and we do. You know, right now, we use engineers primarily for stormwater, and to have that engineered. On a small project, it's $20,000. Usually on these projects, there's phase 1 and phase 2 that have to be done before you can get financing. It's a huge barrier when you add another 10 or 20 grand worth of engineering, another 10 grand worth of architectural. It knocks out the opportunity for a lot of our local people to be able to develop land for their small business. So there's that, not only the barrier to entry that this new document creates, but I noticed that it's really small business unfriendly in the industrial zone. The last 2 lots that have sold, Eli bought one, I sold the other one, they were both 1-acre lots. That's where the demand is. Brattleboro business isn't the book press size anymore. It's a bunch of little businesses inside the book press. It's not a 10-acre piece of industrial property. It's little bite-sized pieces of industrial property that the cottage industries can afford to buy into and develop so that people can be part of the business community. Right. And this ordinance restricts development in the industrial subdivision in the industrial districts to 3 acres. So the 1-acre parcels that are most popular now, that are selling out, can't be created anymore. Only big players can play. Only guys with big pockets can develop commercial real estate, and only guys with big pockets can do the industrial. And that's not where our market is here in town. It's really small businesses, which this ordinance just trashes. And so I'd hope you think about that. There are a lot of unintended consequences from this ordinance. You know, presently, and for the whole history of the town, we've had ordinances that kept car dealers from locating along the interstate. Mm-hmm. This ordinance allows it. One of the uses that's allowed in a commercial, in a industrial zone is car dealerships. And they've rezoned, they proposed to rezone the area up by the fitness center or up north of the interstate bridge where the robot manufacturer is, which is sold. All that is now industrial, but with car dealerships permitted there. Exit 1 Industrial Park, when FW Webb goes empty, or any one of those buildings goes empty that have frontage on the interstate now, that can be John's used car lot. That's just one example. The ordinance is full of mistakes like that, and you should take your time and read them because it's going to present a lot of opportunity to some guys, some car dealers, some, you know, I mean, that's just one example. There are dozens of examples like that. And this new ordinance adds a complete new layer of uncertainty to development of any property in town. For instance, right now, when we submit a plan to the town, they have 15 or 30 days to act on it after we give them a complete application. This changes it to 60 days. So, you know, in those 60 days, normally my tenants found some other deal in Keene or elsewhere because business just doesn't wait that long after a complete application. It's very business unfriendly. You ought to take the time to study it, because I've added according to the list, I've added $8 million to the grand list. I literally couldn't do one of those projects under this ordinance. And you know, somebody else is going to pick up that tab because the expenses aren't going down in town. Somebody's going to pay it. And I suggest you, and I would propose that you restore our commercial designation to the area from the marina to the outer mall, retain those property values, and if the object is to get some more housing in that area, then you could have a residential overlay that was that would get you housing in the fields behind there or whatever. But you know, our property has been zoned to where we could have 16 dwelling units per acre, where we now have a shopping center. But the land costs were so huge getting in, I could never build a dwelling unit. I mean, it's just it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not going to be good for it's going to be bad for business, and it raises, I think, by taking that much, I think it's something like 35% of the commercial properties and downzoning them. That money's got to come from somewhere, tax time, and it's going to be everybody else for the commercial guys, and you ought to rethink that.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. LaCroix. I think that during the presentations that we had 5 or 6 meetings before the select board, the reasons for the neighborhood center, commercial and industrial zones along Putney Road were clearly explained. I specifically recall the discussion about the real limits on developable industrial land in the town of Brattleboro, and our goal of preserving what is available for industrial development going forward, and that being a motivating factor in which land is being zoned industrial, and the specific policy reasons for the development of the neighborhood center district at the south end of Putney Road. And also, when you speak about the complicated nature of the standards, the reasons for implementation of design standards into this zoning ordinance, including making sure that the presentation along Route 5 and Putney Road is consistent with the nature of that district. So I want to thank you for your comments. I think those things have already been addressed substantially, and their relationship to the town plan has already been addressed. But I also would like to ask Rod and or Sue and or Brandy to respond to those matters as well.
Can I ask them to respond to something too? I
Yeah, go for it.
The issue of changing, if we're down zoning.
Yep.
The change in value of the property.
Monetary.
Okay. I'm gonna separate out Mr. LaCroix's comments, the broader ideological ones or thematic ones, from the specific questions to do with draft land use regulations as we're reviewing them tonight. So, and to pick up on Kate's question first. So, the process of assessment, zoning is clearly a factor, but only in the sense that it provides for a list of permitted and conditional uses. Assessment is arrived at from looking at the use of the property as it stands and its potential in the future. And so those are the factors that contribute towards their assessment. It's not a matter of reading off from the zoning district and then establishing what the average value of, say, industrial land is versus commercial land and then applying that. The other part of an assessment that's critical is it's capturing the value of the improvements on the land that gives you the assessed value, not the raw land. So I think we can set that one aside. Mr. LaCroix asked posed the possibility that in future, if the neighborhood center is to be instituted on Putney Road, that Royal Plaza would be a non-conforming use, and in fact, in neighborhood center, shopping mall or plaza is a conditional use, and so Royal Plaza would continue on as a conditional use in that district, and the current owners would be able to develop it as long as it's consistent with the land use regulations in place. It's not true that it would become a non-conforming use. Again, the question of the industrial land versus commercial land further north on Putney Road in the area of the Panda North and Book Press is some of the flattest, best accessed land in terms of utilities and road transportation that we have available in town. And so the decision to change it from commercial to industrial is in recognition of that. Automobile repair or service structures and automobile sales establishments are a conditional use in the industrial district. And of course, under the new guidelines, what we would be looking for if anyone was proposing automobile sales is that they mitigate the visual impact of the use, and that would include being able to be observed from the state highway. The land in question immediately north of 91, just prior to the border with Dummerston, is also subject to an Act 250 permit, which would allow the state, under its authority, to pose questions and require certain conditions be met of the applicant. And I believe because it's within 500 feet of the interstate, that they have a special authority to maintain what they refer to as a buffer. So I feel the risk of that use being a visual blight on the area is limited, given the regulatory oversight of both the state and the town in that regard. And I think that again, the question of increasing the minimum parcel size in industrial districts from 1.5 or 1 acre to 3 acres is in fact on the basis of town staff experience and Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation experience over the last 7 years, where we've frequently been approached by out-of-state and out-of-town potential industrial developers, and we've confronted the problem of actually being able to show reasonably large parcels that could be developed for an industrial use that would accommodate a building in a 60,000 square foot or larger vicinity. And the fact remains that we often are overlooked because we cannot provide potential parties a range of sites that they can choose from. And so we would argue that the fragmentation of the existing industrial districts for uses such as doctors' offices or clinics or something similar is a detriment to the overall long-term economic development of the town.
The only other thing I would inquire about is the time frame, that 60-day issue.
Yeah, I believe we currently have effectively 45 days, and the expectation is that it will change to 60.
No, it's still 45.
It's
by statute.
By
The
statute, it's set by statute at 45.
Allows 45 days to render a decision.
Wait. Just go back and explain that issue, please.
Okay. The question is, how long does it take once you've applied for a permit before a decision is rendered? And on the statute, it's set at 45 days. There's also a built-in appeals period. Right. So
Is there any change in the ordinance?
No.
All right. Anybody else on the board have any questions or comments right now, following up on what Mr. LaCroix had to say, Dave?
I think what the last two people have just described, and I hope John's going to add to it, is kind of the balance that we have to strike here. How do we keep development from making the place unappealing for people to visit, and at the same time, how do we make it easier for people to develop? And I think that and the industrial part of this has really caught my attention, because thinking about industry here in this region is really kind of looking at the past to figure out what we need in the future. And I think there's a real problem with that if you look at what kinds of things are developing and growing, what sorts of enterprises are actually succeeding. I want to read something that I actually brought in to give to Peter, to give to Jan, to put in our packets for when we get to when we start talking about our role in economic development. But I want to read this one little section. The global economy will need 600 million new jobs over the next 20 years. Existing businesses can provide only 10 to 20 million of them. The rest will have to come from startups, so societies everywhere will have to reorient themselves significantly in order to make entrepreneurship easier. And I think that, I think that's kind of what you're pointing out, is if we make it harder instead of easier, it's going to we're not really solving a problem, we're just making it harder. So please bring more specifics and let us talk about them and respond to them, because we don't know as much as everybody else knows. So, thank you.
Sue?
Can I respond to that point? Well, we have increased the minimum lot size for new lots in the industrial zoning district. We've also tried to really restrict the heavy impact uses to there. We're allowing a lot more light industrial office uses elsewhere in town in the urban center as a conditional use, which didn't previously exist. So you couldn't, light manufacturing couldn't happen in the urban center. The proposed regulations are trying to address the startups and kind of being more nimble by allowing that in a lot more districts, and reserving our industrial zoning districts for those uses like the logistics and the businesses and what else that we have in town that have more impact, to kind of separate them.
So let me elaborate on that. Because of changes in the manufacturing process and change in the nature of manufacturing activity and industrial activity in general in the United States, where environmentally destructive and very large scale practices have been, for the most part, located either A, to the south of the United States, or B, overseas. What we're left with is manufacturing activity that has pretty high return, high skill demands, and doesn't make a lot of noise, and doesn't make a lot of pollution. And Commonwealth Dairy and GS Precision would be two examples of contemporary manufacturing enterprises in Brattleboro that don't have very large negative impacts that need to be mitigated over and above the traffic generated by the workers. And so if you're looking at the available land for development in Brattleboro, what we've tried to do with the land use regulations is identify those kinds of impacts, which are not that different from something like a very large scale retail facility. So if you look to the north of town and the south of town, what we've done is pushed off those kinds of uses that generate high levels of traffic, and in particular truck traffic, and tried to, as far as practical, separate them from other parts of town which are denser in nature, older, have a walkable neighborhood feel, and have other attributes and assets that we want to actually foreground. In there, what we've done is broaden the range of uses and encourage the kind of use that's consistent with the new entrepreneurs that you're referring to in that article. The people that are more likely to want to walk to work or work where they live, and have customers and co-workers that feel the same way about it. And so what we're attempting to do here is to protect and advance the assets that we've got in the more established neighborhoods, and control for the negative consequences of large-scale development in specific areas of town that have also got assets that are important for those kinds of uses, including access to the interstate and the railroad, and high voltage electrical access. So what we're actually doing is a very programmatic kind of approach that in fact implements what you're talking about. Even the neighborhood center is a response to that. So what we're doing is we're encouraging a mixed use approach to those two districts that will increase neighborliness in the sense of those being specific neighborhoods, and combine walking and employment and social and educational opportunities within walking distance. And so that is a response to the contemporary expectations that we understand are being expressed by people who have almost infinite freedom to locate wherever they want to, because the nature of their work and the way they earn an income is not dependent on where they are. And so small businesses like Hermit Thrush are examples of businesses that have located here specifically to take advantage of a set of very specific features of Brattleboro. And if we were to, in any serious way, relax or walk back from the standards and the goals that this land use regulation sets out, it would be to the disadvantage of people who are pursuing business opportunities and lifestyle choices such as them.
I'd like to follow up and inquire of Randy, but also of the other people at the table, expanding on Dave's question and then on what Dennis Smith and Mike LaCroix have just said. There's been a sort of proposition that runs through the last sets of comments from the those in attendance, that these regulations will make it more difficult to develop in Brattleboro, that they are more complicated than the prior set of zoning ordinances, that they'll make it more expensive, and that they are essentially development unfriendly. I was on Development Review Board for 9 years. I found the prior ordinance to be a labyrinth of competing and conflicting provisions, which made it extremely complicated to get through a development project from one end to the other. My understanding of these regulations is that they impose design standards, but that they really streamline the process and the requirements and make them clearer. So I'm wondering whether you can address that question, since you looked at the old ordinance and studied it, and then you actually were the first hand at drafting this new ordinance. What's your view about that position, that these make it harder to develop and make it more expensive to develop and are development unfriendly? Because that's essentially what's been presented in the last two comments.
So I understand where the perception that these are more complicated come from. They are more specific, and they're more specific for the purpose of trying to clarify the areas of gray and the inconsistencies and the need to spend a lot of time at the Development Review Board seeking interpretation of regulations that aren't clear. The hope is that applicants can come in, meet with planning staff, meet with the zoning administrative officer, have a good understanding before they go before the Development Review Board exactly what they need to do. There's going to be fewer surprises in this process. You get into the hearing process and, suddenly there are new and different requirements that are starting to come up as these gray regulations are being interpreted by the DRB. I think Mr. Smith made the comment about needing to know the people on the board and such to get, and that has been traditional practice throughout Vermont. Is that the regulations have been fairly broad and general, and a lot of interpretation is done by the board that's in charge of them, and that interpretation can vary over time depending on who sits on the board. Irrespective of whether they're attempting to help their friends and relatives or not. It's just more a matter of different people are going to be looking at these over time, and the interpretations are certainly going to vary. And so the goal is to try to set up a much more clear framework to guide those decisions and ensure consistency over time. We've tried, and this is always the balance that we're trying to reach, to recognize that there are small projects and there are large projects, and we need to provide for both ends of them in terms of what the criteria are going to be. But recognizing that these small changes over time also have impacts and changes, and trying to work towards these overall goals, particularly on the Putney Road and the main corridors in downtown, that the design aspects and character need to be addressed even in terms of smaller changes, because it's a very incremental thing. And I think the other thing to think about is that, in the past 20 years, the process of developing has gotten more complicated. In the past 40 years, it's gotten more complicated. We now care, a lot more about the environmental and the offsite impacts of development at all levels. So from the federal government through state permitting down to local permitting. And it's just the bar has been raised up because we have seen the impact of things that were done unintentionally or not done well, and the impact that those could cause on neighboring properties. Stormwater flooding issues are obviously if you read through the regulations, are obviously a big impact, and looking at trying to recognize that every individual property along the way is contributing to community stormwater and flooding problems, and so that means that really everyone has to sort of take responsibility for the water that falls on their land, and over time we can make incremental improvements to how that water is managed that can benefit the entire community. So I think some of those types of issues, it's just a fact of life that indeed some of these things have gotten a little more complicated in the regulatory scheme of things. But the goal is to try to, as much as possible, streamline that permitting process, be consistent in the application of the rules over time, so people have clear expectations and can know going in, what to expect and how long it's going to take to get through this process and what they need to provide in order to do it. And then they can make a business decision as to what's the best way to proceed forward. And they're not stepping into a black hole.
Thank you. Either of you, Sue or Rod, have anything to add to that response to that inquiry?
No, that, I think Brandy's, I'm not sure about Sue, but Brandy's answered it perfectly for me.
Yes.
Excellent. Anybody on the board?
Yeah, and that's what scares me a little bit. I don't want to be the board that now makes it, you know, down in history that has made it more difficult to start a business in town. Because that is, I think that has been our goal for a long time, to get rid of that perception that Brattleboro is persona non grata. You know, that it's not user-friendly, it's not industrial-friendly, it's not business-friendly. So, and I don't want to take anything away. I know these gentlemen, and they've developed a lot of property in town, and they've done a lot of business in town, and so I do tend to listen to that side of it a little bit, because I don't know, you know, the regulations inside and out, and that's where your expertise comes in. So I just want to be, again, I don't want to be the board that makes it more difficult to try to start a business in town, because that's what I think or to develop in town, you know, because I think that's what our goal is to try to make Brattleboro more industrial friendly, more, you know, because that's what's going to grow our grand list. That's what's going to do, you know, everything that we were trying to do. And I know that geographically and topographically, Brattleboro is not like the rest of the country. I mean, it really isn't. It's a really unique area. We don't have a lot of flat area. We don't have a lot of easily accessible land to develop. So, again, I'm trying to understand it all, and I'm trying to, you know, and I really appreciate all the work that's gone in, but I just want to make sure we listen to both sides. And
if I could just respond really quickly, John. I understand your anxiety, and I think it's well placed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a big change. We're asking for a big change.
Right.
What I'd say is, each one of the examples that we've addressed tonight, you can see it from at least two sides. And so the question of whether increasing the minimum parcel size in industrial districts to 3 acres is a good idea or not from the standpoint of entrepreneurialism or business startups or whatever is a perfectly legitimate question to ask. I would say that what we've done is lay out a set of reasons behind that decision. It's the public have commented on it. We've sought public comment on it. We've received very little negative comment around it. The experience of town staff and other economic development professionals in the area identify and highlight the shortage of available large-ish parcels for industrial development, and I would actually want to argue that 3 acres is not very large in terms of accommodating a contemporary large-scale warehouse or industrial structure. In fact, it's arguably small, right? And so what we're doing there is responding to specific pieces of information that we can pull on to inform those actions and decisions. I think one way of stepping back a little bit and looking at this is, we think this is going to encourage new development and new business activity around contemporary expectations about what Brattleboro should look like and how it should function. And so for every business that's been in existence for a long period of time that might find adaptation to these new regulations something of a struggle in the short to medium term, we hope that there'll be a new business that benefits from this new regulatory framework and finds development opportunities, land development opportunities available to it in the new zoning districts such as neighborhood center or the existing ones such as the urban center, where they can really have their business and their residential lives flourish because we're making the most of what Brattleboro has available here. And so we feel that if we were not to do that, we would be closing off those opportunities. If we were to leave it the way it is, I would argue that we're closing off those opportunities because we are increasing the likelihood that we will be stepped over, because there are other communities that are adhering to these standards and are pursuing these opportunities and are becoming known for it. And that's what's making a difference. And there are myriad examples in Vermont and northern New England in general. White River Junction comes to mind as a is a community that's really changed in its character and its outlook because of sustained but pretty brief demographic and economic change, and it's, you know, in its character and its form, it's really different now than it was 20 years ago. What we're wanting to do is preserve much of Brattleboro's form and find businesses and people who really want to take advantage of that.
Right. We're a little bit in the unenviable position to not, at least I haven't, I don't know if anybody else has been to, I haven't been to one meeting, you know, because it's a little bit out of my comfort zone or whatever, and it's a time thing also, but, so that's why, for me, it's good to hear feedback from both sides. And again, the problem is, we have to make the final decision on whether this goes forward or whether, you know, we pick it apart. And it's a little unfair for all the people that have put hours and hours and hours of work into this, you know, and then I'm hearing, you know, both sides and trying to make a decision on which way to go. So it's, again, I'm not picking on any one particular thing, but I'm just trying to get a sense of everything.
Dave?
I just want to kind of add on to the end of that, and not to make you wait too long, but John did a pretty good job of saying what I wanted to say, but I appreciate especially the thoroughness that you're showing, that you've thought. I mean, anything I mentioned, you've thought of it, and you've got reasons for it, and we've heard those reasons. We just haven't heard the other perspective on it before. And I also especially, actually, I'm grateful for your patience as we do this, and please hold on to it, because it's really helpful to be able to hear, to hear both sides and then try and figure out what we're going to do.
Sure. Well, I just want to give a little bit of counterpoint and say that we've had 6 select board meetings, and I think that I've heard this position that's been articulated by Mr. Smith and Mr. LaCroix before. People came to our previous meetings, Mr. Hubbard came, and expressed exactly this position. Mr. Stevens and Mr. Whitaker and their group came and expressed these same concerns. I've heard many times in these discussions that we need to draw the balance between making sure that there's orderly development that allows development to occur without creating a disincentive to development in the community and commercial activity in the community. And I'm glad to hear those comments again. But I'm not really hearing things that are fundamentally different from what I knew the issues were going to be presented before.
Right.
And I encourage everybody to continue giving their comments. And even more specifically, I want to encourage people, to the extent they have concerns about these draft ordinances, to give us very specific things that they'd like to see drafted differently. Because the broad statement that this is going to make it harder or more expensive to develop is very, very difficult to respond to in that way broad approach and that way broad presentation. So if there are specific things in this draft ordinance that you would like to see written differently and drafted differently, it's been open for comment for almost a full year. To hear specific comments about those matters, and we need to hear those really specific suggestions, because I read this cover to cover and I understand, from beginning to end, what's the development structure here. If you believe that it is going to be a disincentive to development, to commercial activity, we need you to tell us exactly why, because this is, been through at least a dozen or a dozen and a half meetings, public, probably more than that, at Planning Commission, gathering public input, and at Select Board, and we're now at a third draft that is near ready for final approval. So tell us way specifically, please, because we're ready to hear it. We really are.
Dave?
I think further counterpoint. My experience in the previous meetings, particularly with the people you mentioned coming in and doing the presentations, were really on a I don't know if I don't even know how to describe it. It was like technical jargon almost, that there are these practices and that there's this method and this approach that planning people take, and that these are in contradiction to them. And there was nothing specific, very little specific. Here we heard about forest products, we heard about the cost, the time it takes to get a permit done, about having to hire professionals, the industrial tax rate, non-conforming use and effect on property values. I mean, this is all really specific stuff, which is what I appreciate, is because to me, we haven't been hearing that. So I think that's exactly what we got.
I was just going to say, and then we see your hand. Thank you for waiting. I'm going to keep my comments really brief. I agree that we have heard some very important specifics that we as a board can sit with. And I also have compassion for the fact that it's somewhat like an advanced graduate course, I think, to pour through the details. But what I want to say, I just want to say from the position of a board member, that having sat through 6 lengthy sessions where we have heard from our planners the amount of thought and regard for the quality of life from multiple angles, so well thought out, has me really feeling like, with the exception of being able to see around corners and what is it going to feel like to be wanting to develop something 10 years out, I believe we are in such excellent hands in this particular transition, and we'll have to live with this document, do our best to factor in the feedback we're hearing. But for those of you who weren't sitting through hours and hours of discussion and board questions, I can't remember the last time I was so impressed with a process that is incredibly complex and forward-thinking and really aims at preserving a quality of life here that I think anyone who's in attendance tonight would appreciate. So I hear you. We will have further conversation. It's important that you're here, that you're taking your time to weigh in. I think that really is valuable to us as a board. And I also just want to reiterate my respect for the process. It's been impressive from start to finish, so thank you.
Anybody else on the board right now?
Well, I'll let this gentleman go.
No.
Yeah.
This is. I've seen the people whose hands are up, but in terms of structure, the board's comments are coming out now.
The Mets game's on, though.
I know, I'll go fast. I don't want people to get mad at me. I actually agree with what David just said about if people could get really specific, it would help me, because it's sort of alarming to me to hear, oh my gosh, if we pass this thing, economic development and is going to come to a halt, and that's really makes me nervous. But rejecting an entire document also makes me nervous too. So if there is any way to be, I like the hearing about the signs or the property assessed values, anything like that we could really know, and then we could hear, well, here's the reasoning behind this thing. It would really help me, because I don't want to just reject a document outright, but I also don't want to stop economic development in our town. So I sort of echo if you can be specific, and I don't think we're saying it in a way like we don't believe you, be specific. It's more like help us, be specific. So that's mine.
I don't know your name. Come to the mic and tell us your name, please.
Mel Martin, it's a very specific question. Maybe it'll be easy by comparison. In terms of the streamlining, which we've heard about in the process, which will be new, how does that equate to an additional 2 weeks, or I'm not sure if it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks in terms of the process of making a determination? Going from 45 to 60 or 30 to 60?
No, I'm sorry. So if you could please specify what is the current application hearing and decision-making process, and whether that changes at all from the current ordinance to the new ordinance. Anybody at the table, please.
Those are all timeframes that are set forth in statute, and I would have to dig back through. I'm not the expert in Brattleboro's currently adopted zoning, luckily, but there was a time in statute where there were two different time frames for different types of development reviews, and one was 60 days from when an application was submitted, and another was 45 days from the end of the hearing. And I have a feeling that that language is in here based on what I'm hearing from the public. And that language has actually gone away anyway from some of the statutory changes. So now all of the review processes are the same. Something that comes before the administrative officer that needs a permit, once the application is complete and the permit is issued, has a 15-day appeal period. That's statutory. It goes to the DRB. The DRB has its hearings. Once the hearing is closed, has 45 days to make a decision. That's statutory. I think in most cases probably they're more responsive than the full 45 days, and I think the same is true with the zoning administrator acting in a timely manner procedurally. Once they issue, the DRB issues a decision, that has a 30-day appeal period, and that's statutory. So those components really aren't changing from current practice. They may be changing from what's actually written in this document, but they're not changing from practice. And just to speak to where some of the streamlining does come in, we've sort of expanded the range of what can be administratively approved in many ways. There's an administrative site plan review process now, so that not as small things don't have to go through the DRB, which greatly reduces those time frames. Lot line adjustments can now go through administratively. So those are the types of places where streamlining is attempting to occur.
I wanted to mention one area where it could actually result in an increased time frame. So you may recall, and this doesn't show up too well, but we're proposing a historic resource overlay district for our national registered districts. So that's part of the downtown. It's a small part of West Brattleboro Village. It's the Clark Canal neighborhood and the Horton Homestead neighborhood. In that case, we're proposing that there be a design review committee, maybe three to five professionals. They would have 60 days to take an application and they'd have 60 days to review it and issue recommendations that would then go on to the zoning administrator or to the DRB, whichever route it's going. So that's the one area that it could get lengthened.
But those are small districts. Those are really
tiny number of properties.
Yeah, and it has to do with exterior modifications to properties that would go before this design review committee.
And in all three instances, these are communities that are proud and familiar with the fact that the building, that they live and work in districts that are historic districts, and so it only affects the external areas of the property, not the internal, and it's not a question of use necessarily either. So,
all right, I think that answers the timing question.
I hope we've been able to answer your question clearly.
It's probably less to me than what I heard back to you.
Right. So
If it's a non-issue, that's fine.
Let me reassure you, it's a non-issue to the extent that we don't have any control over the issue. So it's set in statute, and it is what it is. I would only also, the only added comment is that we frequently take less time than is statutorily required to render a decision. It's the more typical is 21 days from the time of the hearing to a assigned decision. So we don't expect that to change. The only other component is we are making it really clear and look forward to seeing people who've got development projects in mind, and the planning staff are available to assist people gather the information and access the resources that they need to do. The last part that's critical here is that the DRB proceedings are on the record, what under statute is referred to as on the record review. So these are formal quasi-judicial proceedings where the participants in the process undertake an oath, and the decision has standing, and only the interpretation of the law is appealable, and so it minimizes the frequency with which an appeal of a decision is heard. So for some time now, Brattleboro's been operating under a system where there's arguably a greater degree of certainty. Once you've had a decision rendered by the DRB, it's less likely to be overturned in an appeal proceeding.
Anybody else who's in attendance? Well, who hasn't spoken yet? Jonathan?
Hello. My name is John Julian. I certainly can't speak as eloquently as Mike and Dennis. And full disclosure, I have not read one page of the document. However, from what I understand, that the change of the designation of the property of which I own on Putney Road would preclude me from doing my little project up there. I've been at it for 20 years, and unless I'm wrong about that, I would lose all of my parking, and I would not be able to conduct business as I have for 20 years. If someone could, David was asking about specifics. I've just heard that parking and all of this kind of stuff, road frontage, would all be eliminated if I wanted to sell the property. New owners would not be able to park cars where they currently do. If someone could just clarify that for me. And again, I'm putting my weight behind what Dennis and Mike had said. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Could you help us by telling us where your building is?
Neighborhood.
It's top of the hill.
Top of the
632 Putney Road, top of the hill grill.
Sorry.
Smaller from here.
Okay, so so the change is you're gonna go from commercial to neighborhood center. And I don't really think overall that there's going to be too much impact on that kind of commercial use. Most of the range of commercial uses that are pre-existing in that district will be either permitted or conditional under the neighborhood center designation. Food services, restaurants are permitted. The one clarification there is that no drive-throughs are permitted, because the purpose of the neighborhood center is to encourage bike and pedestrian friendliness and limit auto-oriented development. And I understand that you own what was once a veterinary clinic with parking in front, and it's now become part of your total area of development. Is that correct?
Excuse me?
I don't know.
You
if
own
it was a vet clinic. What was that?
No, it was a TSA.
Or TSA.
Radio station.
It was Tim's.
Right. So
Tim was
you
there.
you have parking arranged immediately off the curb, if there was a curb. So you have your parcels open to Putney Road, and people pull off from Putney Road and park immediately in front of what was TSA and
Howard
TSA.
Howard Printing, yeah.
that's right. So unless and until you propose a really large-scale redevelopment of the site, the question of that car parking is not in question. Ultimately, both the state, when they rebuild Putney Road, and the town would have an interest in ensuring that the parking is arranged more safely.
So while it is true that we are looking to remove parking from within the front yard setback, there is a provision that says existing parking must be removed to the maximum extent feasible given site-specific conditions. You don't really have much
choice.
Flat land on your property. It drops off. There's not a lot to do there, so that would be a situation where you can't.
So your site-specific conditions would afford you possibly some protection. If there was redevelopment of the Aubuchon Plaza immediately to the north, there's the ability to enhance and encourage shared parking and shared access. And from anecdotal observations of your premises on Friday and Saturdays when you're doing really well, I think that's already happening in an informal way. So we wouldn't move to restrict or prevent that from happening. And so what we would envisage is actually more people that could walk to your store and enjoy doing it, and more people living immediately in the neighborhood. And we don't have there's nothing in these regulations, we hope, and we don't think from looking at it, that would make your business less certain than it is now.
Can I follow up on one question that John asked, which is how does potential transfer of ownership impact use of the land and its permanent nature?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Brandy can go into detail about that.
Well, yeah.
Zoning does not look at the ownership of the land, so change in the ownership doesn't trigger any need for zoning permits or things like that. It's changes in how the land is used or new construction that triggers the need to come and, meet the regulations that are in place currently.
Sean, go ahead. You got to come to the mic. Just for the TV.
What about the change of use? If a new owner wants to have a totally different use?
Then they're going to have to conform with the land use regulations as they apply within reason. If it was concluded, well, I mean, it's a permitted use. So, I mean, specifically around questions such as the parking, it would be a direct response to those kinds of requirements. But it's hard to say without, coming up with a hypothetical alternate use or something like that. It would change depending on what the use was.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
So,
We should follow up on this. Yep.
I was going to add one more thing. This is actually one of the sets of changes we've been referring to that the Planning Commission made in between the second and the third drafts, was to put a little bit more flexibility in there for the DRB to assess the site-specific conditions. We heard from business owners that they were concerned about the parking provisions in particular, and some other pieces as well, and have put a little more flexibility in there so the applicant can come to the DRB and demonstrate why it's not possible in case of this example. There just isn't any land there to move the parking to. That language is there now.
So then there is some flexibility in
people can take care of
how
their families.
how you perceive
Yes.
things. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
And I should add, if Mr. Julian was to decide to move along and do something else and sell the property, any subsequent owner looked at the table of uses, both permitted and conditional, I'm fairly confident that if they wanted to continue the business in a business activity on that site, that we could certainly find a range of things that could happen there that would be economically viable to do. And so it's a requirement that under land use regulations that we don't extinguish all possible economic uses. And so what we've done here is craft, in particular with Neighborhood Center, a range of uses that we think are going to contribute to the development of the neighborhood in a really positive way, and embedded in that is, we hope, lots of opportunities for new businesses to take shape precisely in that neighborhood.
Right, because
And just real quickly, I did at one point look at the underlying zone, or the existing zoning right now for most of that area is commercial. It's moving to neighborhood center. It's almost all of the same uses. In fact, there might even be more permitted uses. What's really going on there is a change in the form, because it's smaller buildings, they're closer to the street. We want that area to be more walkable, and we'd like to see more residential there in a mixed-use kind of setting. So.
Anybody else who hasn't been heard from yet who wants to speak? So I'm going to recognize Mr. Smith next.
The fact
Michael, please.
Some flexibility is brand new information to me, and it in a certain sense, it changes everything, because everything I was afraid of all of a sudden has a chance. But on the other hand, now it's a matter of opinion, and we get right back to who's in the planning office and who's on the DRB and who's on the planning commission. So, and that's one thing. The second thing is, you want us to give more specifics. I'll ask a question like I want to do tomorrow, walking into the planning office and say, hey, the Department of Corrections building, the really cool pink building on Putney Road, I want to put in a handicap elevator to the second and third floor. Well, that's going to be an expensive thing to do. First floor is all handicap accessible, second, third floor is not. It's an old building, historical building. It's not on the historical register. Take that back.
Not in a district.
Because then I can't do it. So, but that's going to be a substantial change. Am I going to have to make a choice between whether to put that elevator in and lose probably 30 parking spaces through the new regulations? Not just the regulations of not being able to park between the building and the road, but the fact that parking areas can only go 10 parking spaces wide before they lose 2 parking spaces, and you have to plant trees. And then you can do another 10 parking spaces. But I figure I'll lose at least 30 parking spaces if I have to abide by these rules and regulations. So am I going to have to make a financial choice or a personal choice?
It's not a major project.
Okay, it's not a major project. So even if I spend $80,000 on an elevator,
I know it's a major expense, but it's not a major project.
And it's not a change of use.
It's not a change of use, and you're not likely to change the footprint, so you're all good. So you should just order it.
Just order it. Look at what we've solved.
James?
I wanted to comment on the turnaround time, the 45-day period that's been bandied about.
Go for it.
Just for your information, right now the average turnaround is probably around 14 days on those decisions, and that's a function of how fast Mr. Bannon, the zoning administrator, can draft a decision based on what the DRB dictates at the meeting, and oftentimes it'll go back and forth a couple times between me and he. That wouldn't change based on the new regulations or old regulations. That's really how good is your administrative body working. But I also wanted to address the broad brush issues that you raised, John, and you raised, David. If you're concerned about the impact on development, I think lost in the conversation we're having is how ineffective the current ordinance on the books is.
I agree.
And I've been on the Planning Commission, I think, for 6 years.
Yes.
DRB for something like 5. And Mr. LaCroix, I assume correctly pointed out that there have been about 55 revisions. Those all happen when the Planning Commission addresses the ordinances. And I think I can say with a fair amount of confidence that that's a really problematic process after a while. Because the Planning Commission, we're all a bunch of volunteers. And by the grace of God, we got Miss McLaughlin, who's a professional planner. But generally, you're not talking about people who actually understand what we're doing the way Rod and Sue do in the planning department, who are real professionals. And oftentimes those revisions are based on issues that pop up that weren't planned for. For instance, the most recent one I can remember had to deal with food trucks.
Right.
Food truck phenomenon, it wasn't a thing, then it was a thing, and the Planning Commission tried to write an ordinance to deal with it. It's very hard, even with the guidance of very skilled professionals, to write an ordinance relating to food trucks with a view to how it affects and dovetails with a thick binder full of ordinances. And after 50 or so of those in 30 years, what you get is the legal equivalent of a house that's got some knob and tube and some grounded wire and some copper plumbing and some plastic plumbing. What is that new stuff? The PEX? The PEX. And after a while, we are confronted with 3 repeating challenges on the DRB. One is the challenge, why is this here? Why do we even review this? And that happens the most often when 2 people have properties next to each other and they want to adjust the boundary. And they come before us and, you know, it's a piece of grass, they want to change the line for future subdivision. That's getting completely taken out. I would estimate that's 5 to 10% of all DRB adjudications on that stupid issue that the zoning administrator is very competent to deal with or can refer to us if there's some reason that it should come before the DRB. The other two problems are oftentimes we know in our hearts that either an application should go through because it is a person who is developing in good faith, trying to take care of their neighbors, but it doesn't conform with the law because the law doesn't make a lot of sense. Or two, we know that someone is developing in bad faith, but it conforms to the law. And we know that they're not taking care of their neighbors or the townspeople. Those two issues arise more than I'd care to admit. And it's caused a number of difficult discussions on the board where we say, well, we don't want to do this, but this is the law, so this is what we've got to do. And we walk back out and we do it. I'm very sure that that's the function of a group of well-meaning volunteers who don't really know the code making 50 or 60 revisions. And I can't emphasize enough to you that I think it's fair to characterize the situation as borderline critical with the present code to such an extent where the body charged with enforcing the law oftentimes doesn't want to do it because we know it's wrong.
Right.
Because we know it stifles development, or because we know it allows development that really doesn't fit within a lot of the statutory scheme, but under that one statute it does. The value of having one unified code where the Planning Commission has had to take the time to learn all of our statutes, and where we've hired a consultant to read ours and compare ours with other towns, other cities, other bodies, and to have Rod and Sue, who I think I've been here for 6 years, I believe we've had 100% turnover. It was a totally different planning commission when I started compared to the one that's here now. But Rod and Sue have been here the whole time. So to have people that know the whole code, a consultant that can compare it to outside towns, and have the ability to go through it, gives you the ability to rebuild that house up to code and give the DRB something, one unified thing. It's going to take a little while to understand. And even if Rod and Sue have successfully answered the individual specific problems that have been brought to you by landowners tonight, I'm fairly sure there's a parcel in town that's going to go down in value, or it's going to be more difficult to change the use, and that's going to be unfortunate. But you're digging yourself out of a hole by unifying this code that is causing a lot of problems that are hard to see and is stifling a lot of development in a way I think this board does not see, because oftentimes once people get a bad decision from us, either they throw their hands up or they go to the environmental court. But often, I doubt they bring it to you. I don't know, but I doubt it. So I think I would, I'm sorry, I would ask that the board remember what benefit you're getting by departing from the current regulatory situation to development, and not only let yourself concentrate on specific instances that may be problematic in the future, because you have to remember the larger game.
So James, and I try not to have you talk, because, but does that put Mr. Smith's concern about who is sitting on a board or who is, who he has to go before, does that kind of eliminate that a little bit? And it sounds like it does. I mean, I think
in any small town, his concern would be reasonable. And I grew up in Marlboro, which, is you really know everybody. Yeah. And things can really change from one person to the next. You've got some pretty wild people in position of power. But we have to follow the law, and if we don't, you appeal to the environmental court, and then you have a judge. And if the judge doesn't follow the law, if the judge doesn't like Walmart, or he doesn't like you because you're black, or he doesn't like you because he doesn't like your business, whatever, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. Someone's got to enforce that law. So I'm sensitive to what he's saying, and as the chair of the DRB, I think I'm probably a little defensive about that. But this is a law. It's just like state statute, and there's a scheme by which higher authorities have to review what we're doing to determine whether we're actually adjudicating that law justly.
Right.
So
what I'm getting out of all this, and Dennis, you said it, that what was nice to hear from a concerned citizen was that, wow, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. There is some movement, and it's not as doom and gloom as I think everybody thought.
I'm gonna just weigh in briefly, if I could. James has got 6 and 5 years respectively on Planning Commission and Development Review Board. I was 9 years Development Review Board, 5 or 6 years as chair. And I totally agree with his assessment of the non-functional nature, dysfunctional, non-functional nature of the zoning ordinance. The question whether we need a rewritten ordinance and whether it's more effective to have a unified ordinance, develop a zoning ordinance and subdivision regs together, that's not really a question. We do need that rewrite. The reason that I came back and asked for specifics before is not because I hadn't heard specific concerns raised, but what Brandy explained is that there's a lot of specific criteria now incorporated into this ordinance. And if there are concerns that this ordinance is going to create a disincentive to development, we want to hear those specific provisions where that's the concern. Because the broad concern, this is going to interfere with development.
Right.
It's going to negatively impact my property value. Those are important to listen to so we can hear responses. But what we need to hear, I think, is show me the specific provision here that's going to create that impact. Because we've got a lot more specificity here. I do have to say that I disagree with the notion that the type of decision that one can anticipate from the Development Review Board in Brattleboro is a matter of personalities on the board. I started on the board, I mean, must have been 15 years ago, 16 years ago, and then I was on the board for 9 years, and I didn't overlap with James, I don't think, but he must have come in right after me. And I don't always agree with the decisions that come out of there. There are things about it that concern me, but I don't think that really personalities have ever been the basis for zoning permits. The question has been, what does the ordinance provide for? And then, is this applicant trying to make a reasonable use of their land? And does that conform in some reasonable way with the ordinance as written? And now there'll be a unified ordinance that allows better analysis of that question. And that's really what we're here for. But specific instances where we should make changes to this ordinance, that's what we want to hear. That's where I'm at. Elizabeth?
I just wanted to point out my observation of tonight's comments follow a pattern that we've seen throughout the public hearings. A lot of times people come with a concern and a fear about their property, and then it's discussed, and a lot of times it's a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding, and it goes away. And if there is something to it, then it's pursued. And, you know, we have that document too. Could you hold up that document? It's, you know, the staff took time to write down every comment, color code the comments by the response, give illustrations, and the board examined, you know, every one of those comments, and there's probably 200 of them or more. And I would say, you know, we've had really lively discussions about just this issue, whether the issue and concern is going to hinder development or so forth. And the vast majority of these comments rendered a change to the ordinance to make sure that, you know, we're walking that line and that we're being fair to developers and fair to the abutters. And so I would urge the board to look at that document as well, and you'll see a preponderance of, you know, valid concern for the issue that's being raised and a really good solution. Either there's a philosophical issue that much of the kind that was discussed tonight, that there's a basis for all the changes, you know, a planning concept or principle at work, and that the vast majority of the concerns come from a misunderstanding, and if there is a valid concern, it's addressed. very fairly, and the majority of those comments have been accepted.
Mr. Smith.
I don't mean to give the impression that there's a personality issue in 6 years or 9 years or now. I'm giving you more than a 40-year perspective when I make that comment.
So anybody else who's in attendance have anything that they want to say? I think we've heard from all but 3 people who are here in attendance. I want to thank the 3 people who have also sat through this entire matter and gathered up all the information. We're interested to hear from you now or 2 weeks from now when we reconvene. My sense at this point is that there's no further comments for this evening. So what we're going to do is close the Brattleboro Select Board's first public hearing, October 27, 2015, on the proposed zoning ordinance. We will hold a second public hearing on November 10, 2015, during our regularly scheduled Select Board meeting for that night. And once again, we invite everybody to provide any comments they may have. At that time, we may decide to have another public hearing. We may decide to proceed directly to vote. We may decide to have a vote on another date. Any comments that anybody has, we invite you please to present them to the Select Board, to members of the Planning Department, or to the Town Administration. Is there any further business to come before the Select Board tonight? Rod?
I'd just like to draw your attention to...
Right, can you explain what those are?
Yes, good. Thank you. So, in the long process of formulating the draft land use regulations, there were 2 sections of the draft that we sought outside review on. One we're required to seek outside review on. So this is so-called Chapter 250 and a couple of definitions that occur in other parts of the document, and it's titled the Flood Hazard Overlay District. This section of the land use regulations is something that under statute is reviewed by the Department of Environmental Conservation River Management Program to ensure conformance with the National Flood Insurance Program. They were provided with a draft of this section on August the 18th and began giving us in serial form reviews of this section, which caused us some degree of modification, despite the fact that the language that originally was submitted to them had been approved by them with other communities in mind previously. So after some negotiation with the River Management Program starting late last week when we received their response up until this morning at 8:45 a.m., we were able to establish that they would in fact sign off on draft language. This reflects those latest changes brought about by the back and forth between our office and them. The Planning Commission is aware of that process and was willing to approve a draft knowing that this section was up for review by an external body. The other section is so-called Chapter 310, Site Design and Engineering Standards, specifically access and circulation and driveways, roads and driveways. We sent this out for, in response to some comments from the development community, we sent this out for independent review by a traffic engineer from VHB in Burlington. He provided comments to staff and the Department of Public Works Director and Highway Superintendent. They have reviewed the comments from him. We made minor adjustments to some of the dimensions, basically, with the roads, length of driveways, and so forth. These changes, again, reflect those suggested changes, and again, the Planning Commission is aware that we were, due to scheduling requirements, going to likely make some small adjustments to the language. So both these documents will be available on the town website as of tomorrow for public comment. We would like you to remember this, and when we come back together again on the 10th, these will be part of your review process, and if you so choose to adopt the land use regulations, it would be with this language.
Thank you. Any further business? We're ready for a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. I want to thank everybody who's been in attendance tonight. I want to thank members of the press
BCTV, members of the staff who contributed to this project. I'm sorry I have to do it. Let's go Mets!